Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story. Story number 1. On a moonless September night, a driver named Caleb was pushing his rig west along a desert highway that seemed to go on forever. The clock on the dash showed 2:03 a.m., long past the point where fatigue turns the world soft around the edges. The radio had slipped into a low wash of static, and each mile marker passed like a slow, steady heartbeat. He had hauled frozen food for 16 years, and this run was supposed to be easy, a straight shot across the state, deliver by morning, back on the road by evening. He'd driven this stretch plenty of times. It was a familiar emptiness, long sections of nothing, broken by the rare gas station or small town glowing faintly in the dark. But tonight, the highway felt different. The sky had no stars, just a deep black, as though someone had taken a thick curtain and pulled it over the world. Even the usual distant glow of far-off towns was gone. The only light came from his own headlights and the pale green numbers on the dashboard. Fatigue pressed at his eyes, a slow, heavy burn. He took a sip from his travel mug. The coffee inside was lukewarm and bitter. He grimaced, swallowed, and flexed his fingers on the steering wheel. That was when he noticed the sign. It sprang out of the dark as though it had grown there in the last few seconds. A tall, blue highway sign on the right side of the road, reflective letters gleaming in his beams. Mesa Vista Rest Area, 1 mile, fuel, food, showers, open 24 hours. Caleb blinked. He knew this route. He always fueled up in the same 2 or 3 places, and there had never been a rest area called Mesa Vista. Not here. He glanced at the GPS mounted on his dash. The map showed nothing but the straight line of the highway and empty land on either side. No rest area marker, no exit. His eyes flicked back to the road. Another sign appeared, a smaller one this time, with an arrow and the same name, Mesa Vista Rest Area, next right. The thought of hot coffee and a quick walk around the parking lot tugged at him. Maybe it was new. Highways changed all the time. New exits, new chain restaurants popping up where there used to be nothing. He checked his fuel gauge, just under a quarter tank. He could make it to his usual stop, but he would be cutting it closer than he liked. The sensible part of his mind weighed the options for half a second before the turn signal clicked on almost by itself. The exit ramp curved gently off into the darkness. There were no other vehicles in sight, either on the highway or on the ramp. Just his big rig, the steady roar of the engine, and the faint crunch of gravel under his tires as the pavement changed texture. At the top of the ramp, another sign stood, smaller, almost quaint. White letters on a wooden board. Welcome to Mesa Vista Rest Area. The rest area spread out beyond it, lit unnaturally bright by tall sodium lamps. There was a neat row of truck parking spaces, each lined with crisp white paint. A low building sat in the center, a combination diner, restroom, and convenience store, its windows glowing warm yellow. In front of the building, a small gas station canopy sheltered 4 pumps, old-fashioned but clean. Caleb slowed, glancing around. For such a well-lit place, it was empty. No cars, no other trucks, no movement. He pulled into a truck spot close to the building, set the brake, and cut the engine. The sudden quiet made his ears ring. The silence here felt thick, like standing inside a shut-off refrigerator. He opened the door and climbed down. The air outside was colder than he expected, a dry chill that slipped under his jacket. He paused for a moment, listening. No insects buzzed around the bright lamps. No wind brushed across the asphalt. Somewhere far off, a coyote might have called, or maybe that was just his imagination filling the gap. His boots sounded too loud on the pavement as he walked toward the building. The glass door opened with a soft chime. Warm, slightly stale air greeted him, carrying the smell of coffee, fried food, and the faint, disinfectant scent of a place that tried hard to look clean. Inside, the arrangement was simple. To the right, a small convenience store area with coolers, shelves of snacks, and a few racks of basic trucker odds and ends. To the left, a narrow diner counter with a row of stools and a few booths against the windows. At the back, a hallway led to restrooms and showers. A clock on the wall above the counter said 2:17. There were people inside. That was the first relief. In one of the booths, a family of 4 sat silently over plates of food. Mother, father, 2 kids. They were dressed neatly, as if for church, but their faces were pale and tired. A man in a work jacket and baseball cap occupied a corner stool at the counter, staring down into a bowl of soup. Behind the counter stood a woman in a pink uniform with a small paper hat, wiping a cup with a towel that looked like it had never been used. They all looked up at the same time when Caleb walked in. For just a second, everything went still. Then the woman behind the counter smiled. It was a friendly, practiced smile that somehow didn't reach her eyes. "Late night," she said. "Coffee?" Caleb nodded, feeling oddly self-conscious under all those eyes. "Yeah, please. Black." He slid onto a stool at the counter. The cushions were firm, as though no one had ever sat on them long enough to wear them down. The woman turned to pour coffee from a glass pot sitting on a hot plate. The liquid flowed in a dark stream, steaming gently, but Caleb realized he couldn't hear it. He couldn't hear anything except his own breathing and the faint creak of the stool under him. No faint music, no kitchen noises, no clink of dishes from the back. He glanced toward the family in the booth. The mother was cutting a piece of pancake with slow, careful movements. The father stared out the window, though there was nothing to see but the empty parking lot and the brightly lit pumps. The children sat straight, hands in their laps, plates untouched. None of them were talking. "Here you go." The woman set the mug in front of him. He noticed her name tag then. Lucy, in black letters. The tag was spotless. "Thanks," he said, wrapping his hands around the mug. It was very warm, almost too warm, but the heat felt good on his tired fingers. Lucy tilted her head. "Long way to go before dawn." Caleb frowned slightly. "Yeah, couple 100 miles. Her smile held. "You should rest a while. Plenty of time before morning." He glanced at the clock again. Still 2:17. "That thing broken?" he asked lightly, nodding toward it. Lucy followed his gaze. "No, it's right." Her answer came quickly, almost too quickly. Caleb took a sip of coffee. It tasted fine. Better than most truck stop coffee, actually smooth, not too acidic. It warmed him pleasantly all the way down. "How long you been open out here?" he asked, trying to make normal conversation, to ease the tightness he felt building quietly in his chest. Lucy's smile didn't move. "Quite a while. Drivers come and go. We're always here." The way she said it stirred something uneasy deep in his mind. The man at the corner stool turned his head suddenly. His eyes met Caleb's. They were bloodshot, ringed with heavy shadows, but there was a sharpness in them that didn't match the drooping lines of his face. He opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, then closed it again. Slowly, he turned back to his bowl of soup. Caleb shifted on his stool. The coffee was cooling in his mug. Or at least, it should have been. But when he took a second sip, it was just as hot as the first. He checked his watch. 2:23. The wall clock still read 2:17. A faint prickle crept up the back of his neck. He told himself the clock must be stuck, the hands broken. Maybe someone had bumped it. Little things like that happened all the time. "You got diesel out there?" he asked, nodding toward the pumps. Lucy nodded. "We've got everything you need." She said it with an odd emphasis on the last word. As he watched, her eyes flicked briefly toward the man in the corner, then toward the family in the booth, before she looked back at him. The father in the booth spoke suddenly, voice low and thin. "You should get your fuel and go, friend." The mother's hand tightened around her fork. "Harold," she whispered sharply. The boy and girl sat perfectly still, their eyes wide, staring at their plates. Lucy's smile never faltered. "Don't worry about him. People say all sorts of things when they're tired." Her tone was soothing, but there was a fine tension in her jaw. Caleb swallowed another mouthful of coffee. The warmth in his chest had started to feel more like a slow, sinking weight. He slid off the stool. "I'll just top off the tank and be on my way." Lucy nodded, but her expression was strange, as if she were trying to keep it pleasant through some invisible strain. "We'll be here if you change your mind." He stepped back out into the night. The air felt colder than before, tinged with a very faint smell of something metallic. The parking lot lights hummed softly, a sound he was almost relieved to hear after the muffled quiet inside. He walked to the fuel island. The pumps were older models with physical dials instead of digital screens. A small sticker on the side listed fuel prices that were far lower than any he'd seen in years. He swiped his card. No beep, no error, just nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. Frowning, he pulled the nozzle free and squeezed the handle. To his surprise, fuel began to flow. The numbers on the dials slowly spinning upward on their own. The hose vibrated faintly in his hand, heavy with the rush of liquid. He checked the ground. No leaks, no spilled fuel. Everything was in place, too neat, too orderly. He looked back at his truck. It sat there in the bright light, paint looking oddly fresh, chrome glinting. For a fleeting second, it looked like someone had polished it while he was inside. That was ridiculous, of course. He blinked, and it looked normal again, dusted with the desert, bug-splattered, the way it had always been. The pump clicked off. He returned the nozzle, wiping his hand on his jeans. He looked up at the sky without thinking, expecting the familiar spread of stars he knew so well. There were none. The black overhead was thick and empty, a ceiling instead of a sky. The sight made his stomach twist. He forced himself to walk calmly back toward the building. He intended only to pay, maybe use the restroom, then get back on the road. The sooner he left, the better. Through the front windows, Lucy stood behind the counter, exactly where he'd left her. The man on the corner stool hadn't moved. The family remained in their booth. It was like looking at a single frozen moment. Caleb entered. The door chimed. No one turned. For a breathless instant, he wondered if they would stay like that forever. Statues, trapped in a glass box of light. Then Lucy moved, as fluid and brisk as before. The family's fork scraped softly against plates. The man shifted on his stool. Top off? Lucy asked, already punching buttons on a register that looked like it belonged in another decade. Yeah. Caleb placed a few bills on the counter. Card wouldn't read. Her eyes flicked to the money. That'll do. She took it, fingers lingering on the paper for a heartbeat longer than felt normal. You sure you don't want to sit a little while? Place your head down? You must be tired. He was tired. His bones ached with it. The thought of stretching out in the sleeper cab for an hour sounded unbelievably good. I need to make delivery, he said. The man at the far stool spoke then, voice rough, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. Listen to me. He didn't look at Caleb. He stared straight ahead. When you pull out, don't look in the mirrors. A shiver went through Caleb. The father in the booth put his fork down carefully. That's enough, he said to the man. But his eyes were on Caleb, full of something like sympathy and fear all at once. Lucy's smile thinned. Don't mind them. Some folks just don't know when they've had enough coffee. The boy in the booth whispered, barely audible. You don't have to stay. You can go back. Caleb's throat felt dry. He didn't ask them what they meant. He didn't ask Lucy anything more. He simply nodded, cleared his throat, and turned toward the door. As he walked down the short hallway toward the restroom, he noticed something strange. The floor tiles were spotless. Not a scuff mark, not a stain, despite how many travelers must have come through. If this place had really been open, quite a while. The posters on the wall, tourism ads for nearby canyons and ghost towns, looked like they had never been touched, their colors sharp and unfaded. In the restroom, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The mirrors reflected him just fine. Tired eyes, a hint of stubble, the fading logo on his jacket. He splashed cold water on his face. The water ran clear, clean. Maybe he was just worn down. Maybe his mind was playing tricks. He dried his face and decided not to linger. When he stepped back out into the main room, something small but vital had changed. The clock above the counter still read 2:17. His watch read 2:39. Lucy was still at the counter, the man still at his stool, the family still at their booth. But their positions were slightly different. The girl's hand had moved closer to the edge of the table. The man's bowl of soup was nearly empty. How long was I in there? Caleb asked lightly. Lucy's eyes shone too bright. Just a minute. He didn't argue. There was an invisible line in the air now, and stepping over it felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with fists or weapons. He could sense it, like a dog senses a coming storm. He walked to the door. The man at the stool didn't look at him this time, but his lips moved, soundless. Caleb could read them anyway. "Don't stay." The door chimed. Cold air welcomed him again, sharper now, almost biting. He moved quickly to his rig, climbed inside, and shut the door with a solid, comforting thunk. The cab smelled like coffee and dust and old leather. Familiar. Anchoring. He started the engine. It turned over slower than it should have, like it had been sitting idle for days instead of less than half an hour. The dash lights flickered, then settled. The rearview mirror showed the rest area building, small and neat under its bright lights. For a moment, he considered what the man had said. Don't look in the mirrors. He adjusted them anyway, by force of habit. The left one framed the row of parking spaces, all empty. The right one showed the gas pumps. Silent now. Nothing strange. Just an odd, quiet rest area where time seemed to stick to the walls. He eased the truck into gear and rolled slowly toward the exit back to the highway. The tires whispered over the immaculate pavement. As he passed the building, he glanced once, unable to resist. The family in the booth was now standing at the window, all four lined up, watching his truck. The children's faces were pressed to the glass. The father had one hand flat on it, fingers splayed. The mother's lips were moving rapidly, though he couldn't hear a word. Lucy stood behind them. Her smile was gone. Her face was calm, eyes fixed on him, unblinking. A sudden, overwhelming urge to honk, to wave, to do anything normal seized him. He fought it down. He focused on the exit. The driveway leading back to the highway stretched ahead, the sign for the interstate looming at the end, its green panels washed pale by his headlights. As he passed under the last tall lamp, the light flickered. In his right mirror, for the briefest second, the building behind him went dark. No parking lot lights, no window glow. Just a black shape against black sky, its outline jagged and wrong. He looked quickly at the building itself through the windshield's edge. It was still lit, just as before. Cold sweat popped out on his forehead. He gripped the wheel tighter and pressed the accelerator, feeling the engine respond with a comforting growl. The ramp to the highway rose gently before him. The sign for the main road loomed closer. In his left mirror now, something shifted. The row of empty truck spaces rippled, as if a heat wave had passed over them. For a heartbeat, they were full, every slot occupied by a truck, old and new, some models decades out of date. The rigs sat perfectly still, engines off, no drivers in sight. Then, just as quickly, the spaces were empty again. His breath came shallow. He fixed his eyes on the point where the ramp rejoined the main highway and did exactly as the strange man had said. He stopped looking in the mirrors. The rig rolled up onto the highway, tires thumping softly over the seam between the ramp and the main lanes. He straightened the wheel, matched his speed to an invisible flow of traffic that didn't exist, and drove. Mile marker after mile marker passed in the bright tunnel of his headlights. The sky stayed blank above him. The radio, when he reached to adjust it, slid past stations of thin, whispery static until, finally, a distant classic rock song drifted in, warbling and faint. He exhaled slowly. After 10 miles, he cut a glance at the mirrors. Only the dark highway stretched behind. No extra trucks. No strange lights. The GPS screen flickered once, then cleared. The map showed exactly where he expected to be out in the middle of nowhere, nearest exit still dozens of miles ahead. No sign of any rest area, before or behind. His fuel gauge was full. That morning, as pale daylight finally crept over the desert, he pulled into his usual truck stop on the edge of a real familiar town. Other rigs were parked in neat lines. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee rolled out from the diner. Inside, he sat at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug that cooled normally, ticking down degree by degree as the minutes passed. He asked the woman behind the counter, an older lady with tired eyes and a real name tag, about Mesa Vista Rest Area. She frowned. Mesa Vista? Honey, there's no rest area out that way. Closest one is 50 miles east, and it's been closed for repairs for months. What about before, he asked. Like years back? She shook her head. Nothing called that. Not that I ever heard. And I've lived along this stretch my whole life. Another driver down the counter looked over. Mesa Vista, he said slowly. Heard that name once. Old-timer told me about it. Said there used to be a rest stop somewhere out in the desert where folks went missing. Whole families. Drivers. They shut it down. Tore it out. Left nothing but dirt and a no services sign. He shrugged. Just a story, though. One of those things they tell rookies to spook 'em. Caleb said, nothing. His watch ticked steadily on his wrist. The clock on the wall moved too. 8-1. 8-2. 8-3. Time behaved. Later, back in his cab, he traced his route on a paper map. The place where the exit should have been was marked with nothing, just the clean line of the highway across the blank of the desert. On his next few runs through that stretch, he watched the roadside signs carefully. He never saw Mesa Vista again. Not the rest area, not the name. Months passed. The feeling of that frozen clock and those silent watching faces faded a little, becoming more like a strange dream than a memory. Then, one night, rolling through the same dark desert, his CB crackled to life. Anyone out there seen this new rest stop? Mesa something? A voice asked. Sign says fuel and food. Next right. Must be new. Caleb's hand shot to the radio. His heart slammed once. Hard. He opened his mouth to respond. To say don't exit, don't stop, keep driving. But the CB hissed, sputtered, and went dead. The dial glowed uselessly in the dark. No matter how he tapped or twisted or checked the wires, he heard only thin, empty static for the rest of the night. Out beyond his windshield, the highway stretched on, quiet and endless, with no signposts in sight. Story number 2. Long before midnight, the rain had turned the interstate into a smooth, shining ribbon, reflecting headlights like a moving river of light. A driver named Hannah guided her blue Freightliner through the steady downpour, wipers beating a slow, rhythmic pattern across the glass. She was running light, no cargo, just an empty refrigerated trailer humming quietly behind her. She had dropped her load of produce 2 towns back and was headed to a cold storage warehouse on the other side of the mountains to pick up her next haul. On paper, it was an easy stretch. No heavy grades, plenty of time before her appointment window, and a route she'd run a dozen times. But the truck did not feel empty. From the moment she'd merged back onto the highway after her last drop, she'd had the same odd sensation. The engine working a little harder than it should, the steering just a touch heavier, the way the rig settled on its suspension like it was riding low. Her gauges told her everything was fine. Air pressure steady, temperatures normal. Fuel use maybe a little high, but chalked up to the rain and wind. She tried to ignore it. Everyone had off days. Everyone had nights when the truck just felt different. The CB was quiet except for the occasional hiss of static and a distant voice crackling in and out of range. The radio barely held onto a late-night talk station before that too dissolved into noise. Outside, the world was reduced to the white arc of her headlights, sheets of rain rushing toward the glass, and the blurred glow of distant taillights. A green sign flashed past on the right, words bright against the wet darkness. Way station. 3 miles. All trucks next. Right when flashing. The yellow lights beneath the sign pulsed steadily. Hannah sighed softly. Of course it's open, she muttered, though no one was there to hear it. She checked her log on the dash. Plenty of hours left. No schedule pressure. Technically, it was just a nuisance. A short detour off the main line. Roll across the scales, back on the road. But the memory of how heavy the truck had felt all night added a small, unwelcome knot of worry under her ribs. She knew this scale house. It sat alone in a wide, cleared patch carved out of tall evergreens. During the day, it looked almost friendly bright green grass in the median, a flag snapping in the breeze, trucks lined up like patient cattle. At night, though, it took on a different character. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the shadows too black, the building too quiet between waves of traffic. She drove on. Another sign appeared. Way station. 1 mile. Prepare to stop. The rain softened to a mist as she approached. Hannah flipped the heat up a notch, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders from hours of sitting. The rig purred along, a reliable metal cocoon against the lonely stretch of mountains. Far ahead, a cluster of white and orange lights marked the way station. The open divided by close sign glowed red. Open. She moved into the right lane, guiding the Freightliner onto the off-ramp marked trucks. The pavement here was slick but well marked, white lines gleaming under her headlights. Cones funneled her toward the scales. A digital sign over the lane instructed, "Trucks, 5 miles per hour. Do not stop on scale." Hannah eased off the accelerator. The big blue nose of the tractor glided forward, rain hissing softly under the tires. As she rolled over the first set of sensors, more digits lit up on a board ahead, turning from zeros to numbers. Gross weight, 78,460 pounds. Hannah frowned, eyes flicking from the board to her dash. Her rig's empty weight tractor, plus reefer, no cargo, full fuel was around 35,000. With a normal load, she flirted with 79,000 sometimes. But tonight she was empty. Her heart gave a slow, uneasy thump. She rolled off the scale. A red light above the lane came on, and a mechanical arm descended, blocking her path. Next to the arm, more words lit up on a second sign. Pull ahead, park, bring papers. She swallowed and did as instructed, pulling into a lined spot in front of the low, square-scale house. Yellow light spilled from its windows, casting long, watery reflections on the wet pavement. The rain picked up again, drumming lightly on the roof of the cab. For a moment she just sat there, listening to the engine idle. The truck felt heavy even at rest, like something invisible pressed it down toward the earth. Finally she shut it off, grabbed her folder of paperwork, and stepped out into the night. The air was cold and clean, full of that sharp, green smell that comes when rain washes through pine-covered hills. Her boots splashed softly as she crossed the slick asphalt to the building. Inside, warmth hit her first. Then the faint smell of coffee, printer ink, and damp jackets. The room was plain, a counter, a couple of chairs, a row of monitors showing live feeds of the scales and yard. A large man in a gray uniform sat behind the desk, glasses perched on his nose, a half-finished cup of something steaming by his elbow. He looked up when she entered. His name tag read, Wilkins. "Evening," he said. "Paperwork, please." She handed over her registration, logs, and bills of lading. He glanced through them with practiced ease, fingers moving quickly. "Empty?" he asked, not looking up. "Yeah, dropped in Ridgeview, heading to Cascade Cold Storage for pickup." He grunted, entered something into his computer. The side of his face was lit by the glow of the screen. Hannah watched his expression. His brows knit together. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "Something wrong?" He glanced at her, then back at the monitor. "You said empty." "Oh, I am. Trailer's clean. Doors sealed. But it's just air back there." Wilkins leaned closer to his screen, scrolling with his mouse. "Scale has you at 78 and change. That's almost maxed out for your rig." He said it calmly, but a quiet note of curiosity threaded through his voice. "I know," Hannah said carefully. "I saw the board. I'm not carrying anything. You can check it if you want." He considered her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right. Keys?" She handed them over and followed him back out into the rain. The lot was quieter now, only a couple of other trucks idling on the far side of the building. Their engines hummed softly, low and steady like distant bees. Wilkins walked with the easy, deliberate stride of someone who had paced this same path 1,000 times. He circled around to the rear of her trailer, his beams cutting through the drizzle. "Break the seal," he said. Hannah pulled off the small plastic tab and tugged the handle. The heavy doors swung open with a dull creak. The inside of the trailer gleamed pale in the light, empty aluminum walls. Ridged floor, faint smell of disinfectant and faint remnants of produce. The small reefer unit at the front hummed softly, maintaining a neutral temperature. Nothing else. No pallets. No boxes. No stain or scrap or stray strap. Wilkins stood at the threshold, looking in. The rain pattered on the roof, soft and steady. "Step up for me," he said quietly. She did, boots echoing in the hollow space. The trailer should have amplified every movement, but the sound came back to her oddly muffled, like shouting into a room filled with thick curtains. She walked the length of it, hand trailing along the cool metal wall, eyes scanning for anything out of place. The temperature was normal. The air, though, felt full somehow, as if the space were already occupied by something that refused to show itself. She paused halfway down, listening. Nothing. No skitter of rodents, no drip of water, no rattle of loose hardware. Just the faint, pulsing vibration of the running unit outside. Satisfied or trying to be, she walked back to the rear. Wilkins watched her with a furrowed brow. "Empty is empty," he said finally. "But that scales never jumped that high on a ghost reading." He shut the doors with a firm pull. The metal thudded closed, the sound absorbed by the rain. "Maybe the system glitched," Hannah offered. "Wet electronics, I don't know." "Maybe," he sounded, unconvinced. They walked back toward the building. Through the glass, the overhead monitors glowed quietly. "Been working here a long time?" she asked, more to break the strange tension than out of real curiosity. "Almost 20 years, he said. "Long enough to see every excuse in the book for overweight loads. But I don't get many drivers arguing to add weight they don't have." They went back inside. He checked his screen again, tapped a few keys, then pressed his lips together. "Tell you what," he said. "Back over for me. One more pass. Go slow." She took her keys and headed out once more. The rain had softened again to a fine mist that sparkled in the harsh lights. Hannah pulled her rig around in a lazy loop, lined up with the scale lane, and rolled forward at a crawl. The digital board ahead woke up. Gross weight, 78,460 pounds. Exactly the same. She parked again and trudged back into the scale house, damp hair clinging to her forehead. Wilkins studied the readout, then looked at her. "You ever hear of phantom loads?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "Like, bad readings?" He shrugged one shoulder. "That's what we call them when the gear says something's there, but you open the doors and there's nothing. Doesn't happen often. But when it does, it's usually on nights like this. Quiet, rainy." His tone was too light, like someone deliberately skimming over something deeper. She waited. He sighed softly and clicked off one of the monitors, its glow vanishing. The room felt immediately darker. "About 12 years back," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "There was a pileup 10 miles east of here. Tractor trailer jackknifed on the ice. Chain reaction. Couple of cars and a small bus didn't make it through. Whole stretch was shut down for half a day. We boiled coffee for troopers and watched the rain come down like this. And every truck that rolled across these scales that night weighed heavier than its paperwork said it should." He didn't describe details. He didn't have to. The simple phrase, "didn't make it," painted its own quiet picture. "Since then," he went on, "every now and then, especially near the date, we get a reading like yours. Sometimes from empties, sometimes from half-loaded trailers that suddenly register max weight. Nobody's ever found a cause that sticks. New equipment, new calibrations, same thing. It comes and goes." His skin prickled. He pushed her paperwork back across the counter. "Legally, I should treat you as overweight. But I've seen this enough to know I'd just be arguing with numbers nobody understands. Your logs are clean, trailer's empty. Move along. Keep it under the limit. And drive careful through mile markers. 112 to 116. She picked up her folder. "Why those?" He hesitated. "That's where that accident was," he said quietly. "Folks say the road runs heavy there." The phrase sat in the air between them. "Thanks," she said, because she couldn't think of anything else. Back in the cab, the familiar smell of coffee and vinyl felt like a small comfort. She started the engine. The Freightliner shivered to life, gauges lighting up in a soft, colorful arc. The truck still felt heavy beneath her, but now she knew exactly how heavy. 78,000 with nothing back there, she murmured. She eased off the lot and merged again onto the dark highway. For a while, nothing happened. The rain thinned. Evergreen silhouettes pressed in on either side, tall and silent. Her headlights carved out a clear path. Beyond that, blackness swallowed everything. Her phone's navigation app quietly tracked her progress. A small blue triangle sliding along the digital line, 23 miles to the turnoff that would bring her down toward the valley and the cold storage facility. The hum of the road seeped into her engine, tires, wind. Her mind began to drift in that strange, focused way of long-haul driving, alert and relaxed at the same time. Then, Somewhere near mile marker 110, she felt it. A shift. Not a bump, not a gust of wind. More like the truck settling further, as though something had just stepped into the back and found a place to stand. The steering wheel tugged minutely in her hands. She corrected without thinking, heart picking up speed. "Come on," she mumbled. "Don't do this now." She flicked her eyes to the mirrors. The trailer stretched out behind her, pale in the wash of her lights, clean and blank. The red dots of the rear markers glowed steadily. No flapping doors, no stray tarp. Nothing to explain the feeling. And yet, her ears caught something beneath the bass note of the engine, a faint, almost imagined sound. A series of tiny impacts, like footsteps? Barely there. Then gone. She turned the radio down even further, listening. Silence. Only the wet whisper of rubber on asphalt. Mile marker 111 slid by. White on green sign glowing damply. The air in the cab felt cooler. A chill brushed her forearms, making the tiny hairs stand up. She resisted the urge to glance back into the sleeper, to prove to herself she was alone. Her phone screen wavered, the map flickering once. The navigation voice, which had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Recalculating," it said calmly. "In 1.2 miles, make a U-turn." She frowned. "No," she said out loud. "No. U-turns." The blue triangle on the map showed her positioned on the highway, exactly where she knew she was. The route line, though, had shifted, looping her backward in a short arc, right through the area Wilkins had mentioned. She tapped the screen. The app hiccuped, then righted itself. "Continue straight," the voice said, as if nothing had happened. Mile marker 112 appeared on the right. The feeling of added weight intensified with each yard. Her foot pressed a little harder on the accelerator to maintain speed, though the grade was flat. The engine's tone dropped, working just a bit more than it should. And then, faintly, from somewhere behind her, there was a sound. Not loud, not even distinct. More like a soft, collective sigh. She froze. The wheel stayed steady under her hands, but her attention tunneled backward, through the sleeper, through the thin metal wall, into the dark interior of the trailer. Another sound followed, a faint shift, like fabric brushing metal. Then, a murmur. Too low to parse, like a conversation held in another room with the door mostly closed. Hannah's fingers began to tingle. She swallowed, throat dry. "You're tired," she told herself softly. "You're just hearing the reefer unit cycling, the road, the rain, that's all." Ahead, through the wavering beams of her lights, shapes materialized. Brake lights. A cluster of red dots blinked to life in the distance, scattered across her lane and the one beside it. The reflective triangles of hazard signs glinted on the shoulder. She eased off the throttle, foot moving to the brake gingerly. The truck responded, sluggishly, like an overloaded rig at the end of a steep descent. Again, that quiet murmur from behind swelled for a heartbeat, then faded. She dropped a gear, watching her speed bleed off. The rain slicked the pavement into something treacherous and dark. Up ahead, a delivery van sat sideways across the right lane, its flashers stuttering weakly. A small sedan crawled in the left lane, hazard lights blinking frantically as it tried to edge past the blockage. A mile further back, a distracted driver might have plowed into the mess without enough time to stop. Hannah's grip tightened. Her heavy, not heavy truck rolled forward, brakes hissing softly. She didn't see any reason she should have reacted this early. The cluster had been far away, their lights tiny, half obscured by rain. But something, a sound, a sensation, a weight had tugged at her attention seconds before she would have noticed them on her own. She came to a smooth, controlled crawl, well short of the van. The sedan squeezed past and accelerated away, its taillights shrinking. As she waited for her own chance to move, she turned her head slightly, listening. The murmurs behind her had changed. They didn't sound like conversation anymore. They sounded like relief. Her scalp prickled. She inched forward when there was room, threading her way around the van and back into open road. Once past the obstruction, she accelerated gently. Mile marker 113 gleamed by, then 114, then 115. With each sign, the rig felt a little less burdened. The steering lightened. The engine note shifted back to its familiar, easy thrum. Her navigation stayed steady now, silently following her progress. She drove in a focused quiet, the rain eventually letting up, leaving only mist and damp pavement in its wake. Trees loomed and fell away, their branches dripping. By mile marker 120, the truck felt completely normal again. At the valley floor, she stopped at a small, independent truck stop to top off her fuel before heading into town for her pickup. It was a modest place, 2 pumps, a faded sign, a diner with fogged windows and neon flickering in the early morning. Under the harsh canopy lights, she watched the fuel numbers climb on the display. The rig sat level, no longer sagging on its springs. On impulse, once she'd paid, she walked to the back of the trailer and opened the doors. Cool, empty air greeted her. The aluminum walls shone faintly. No scuffs that hadn't been there before. No stray marks or muddy footprints. But on the inside of the right rear door, down low where only someone close to the floor might have touched, the condensation had formed in an odd pattern. The moist air from outside, mixing with the slightly cooler interior, left a light fog on the metal. In the fog, for just a second, she saw them. The faint outlines of 4 or 5 small handprints. Child-sized. Pressed from the inside out. She stared, heart thudding, breath shallow. Then, as she watched, the fog thinned. The prints blurred, ran, and vanished, leaving only smooth, damp metal behind. Her hand shook as she closed the doors and sealed them. She made her delivery on time that morning. The cold storage plant was busy, forklifts whining, workers shouting over the noise. The mundane, everyday chaos grounded her. By the time she was back on the road, sun high and clouds breaking, the night's strange events felt like something that had happened to someone else. Still, a week later, curiosity pulled her back to the way station on her return trip, this time in full daylight. The sun painted the building in warm color. Trucks lined up in both lanes. The open sign glowed steadily. Her weight this time fully loaded matched her paperwork exactly. No odd readings, no phantom pounds. On her next pass, she timed her run to put her at that stretch of highway near midnight again, without quite admitting to herself why. She told dispatch she preferred the night slot, less traffic. She didn't mention mile markers or phantom loads. The scales read as expected that night. Normal, ordinary, but once a year, always in the same cold, wet month, drivers along that route would trade certain stories. A rig that weighed too much rolling over an empty scale. A driver who swore invisible weight saved him from pushing too fast through a fog bank. Soft sounds in a trailer where there was nothing to make them. Flickers on navigation apps that tried, for a few seconds, to redraw routes back toward an old scar on the highway at mile 112. Hannah never told many people what she had heard that night, or what she had seen in the condensation on the trailer door. But whenever the anniversary of that long-ago pileup rolled around, she found herself volunteering for that corridor again, checking her mirrors a little more often, watching the road near 112 to 116 with a familiar, quiet tension. Sometimes on those nights, the truck felt just a little heavier than it should when she passed under the stare of the trees. And sometimes, from somewhere behind her, so faint she couldn't be sure it was real, there came the almost sound of many soft, steady breaths, all letting go at once when she rolled safely by. Story number 3. On most nights, the CB was just background noise to Ethan, crackles of half-heard jokes, weather reports from drivers 3 states away, the occasional burst of someone singing along with a song only they could hear. It helped fill the space between the engine's drone and the whine of the tires. It made the cab feel less like a tiny island floating in the middle of nowhere. He wasn't the kind of driver who lived on the radio. He checked in, listened for trouble, answered when someone called him directly, and that was about it. He'd learned early on that some conversations on the air could pull a person too far out of their own lane, and distraction on a dark highway was never a friend. That night, though, he kept the volume a little higher than usual. A few hours earlier, back at a truck stop on the edge of the plains, an older driver had mentioned the stretch of road Ethan was heading for, a quiet, lampless run between 2 distant towns where the land went flat and the sky seemed too big. They call that 40 miles the dead air stretch, the old driver had said, stirring sugar into his coffee. Radio goes funny out there. Some nights you can't raise a soul 5 miles away. Other nights you pick up voices don't match any place on the map. Old ads, old music, sometimes older things. He'd given Ethan a look that hovered somewhere between amusement and warning. "Just keep your eyes on the road," he went on. "If the CB starts getting strange, remember you don't have to answer everything that calls you." Ethan had smiled politely and chalked it up to one of those road legends, the kind that grew taller with each retelling. But hours later, with his headlights carving out a narrow tunnel in the clear darkness, and the world around him shrinking down to the dashboard glow and the lines of the pavement, he thought about that story again. The dead air stretch started past mile marker 312. Drivers called it that not because the signal was bad, there were plenty of repeaters and towers, but because something about the airwaves there felt off. He didn't really believe in haunted radios or phantom frequencies. Still, when his odometer rolled closer to the number, he reached over and nudged the CB knob a little to the right. The static grew louder, then settled into a low susurrus. Every now and then, a voice bled through someone 30 miles ahead talking about weather, a pair of locals bantering about a football game, the squeak of an overpowered mic. "Northbound, you out there?" a distant driver asked someone. "How's it looking at 320? "Dry and empty," another voice answered. "You got the road to yourself, partner." Ethan checked his mirrors. No headlights behind him, no one coming up fast in his lane. Ahead, the highway flowed clean and silent, a black ribbon under a star-pricked sky. The air was cold, but the windshield stayed clear. No fog, no rain, just a crisp night over an empty landscape. His own handle, stenciled in small white letters on the back of his trucker cap, was Wayfarer. A little dramatic, maybe, but he'd chosen it years ago when the novelty of cross-country runs still felt fresh. On the air, he usually just gave his mile marker and direction. Names didn't matter much in the passing blur of taillights. He passed mile marker 312. The sign slipped past on his right, green and reflective, gone too quickly to dwell on. A few minutes later, the CB hissed softly, then went quiet. Not off, just hollow. The usual chatter faded away, as if someone had closed a heavy door. In its place came a thin, distant hum, like a station just out of reach. Ethan frowned slightly and tapped the squelch. The hum dipped, then rose again. Maybe the other driver was right, he thought. Maybe there really was a dead zone out here. He focused on the road. The land on either side stretched out, flat and empty, only an occasional fence post catching his lights. The sky overhead was a huge, dark dome. No town glow on the horizon. No farmhouses with lone porch lights. Just his own moving bubble of illumination. Then the CB crackled once sharp, clear. "Radio check 19. Anybody out here reading Blue June?" The voice was female, warm, a little husky, like someone who'd spent a long time talking over noise. It had that particular clipped rhythm of people who'd been on the air long enough to fold their words neatly together. Ethan hesitated. Maybe she was closer than she sounded. Maybe the dead air just made her come through sharper. He pressed the button on his mic. "Gotcha, Blue June. You got Wayfarer. Westbound at 319. Loud and clear." A brief pause. Static whispered, tiny, like breath catching. "Well, that's a comfort," the voice said. "Thought I was the only fool out here in this mess." "Looks pretty clean from where I'm sitting," Ethan replied, watching his beams wash over dry asphalt. "Stars are out." "Where you running?" "Same direction you are, far as I can tell," she said. "Just past exit." "Hang on." He saw a ramp sign ahead on his right. "Exit 318, Hollister, divided by Farm Road 22. 318? He offered. "Yeah." Her chuckle crackled through the speaker. "You a mind reader, Wayfarer?" Ethan's fingers stilled on the wheel. "That's the exit I'm passing right now. If you can see it, then you can probably see what I'm dealing with too," she said. "This snow's something else. I can barely see the hood ornament, and the drifts on the shoulder are starting to look like small mountains. You watch your speed." They didn't bother plowing out past these little towns yet. He glanced at his windshield. No snow. Just a few insects ticking softly against the glass. "How bad you got it?" he asked carefully. Blue June blew out a breath that fuzzed with static. "White walls. I've got one set of taillights in front of me, and a whole lot of nothing behind. Wind's trying to shove me sideways every time I blink. You sound like you're about to tell me you're sitting pretty, and I'm just talking to somebody 500 miles away." Ethan thought of Skip, of signals bouncing off layers of atmosphere in strange ways. It happened sometimes, voices from states away suddenly blooming into clarity, while the guy 10 miles ahead came through like he was underwater. "Where you hauling out of?" he asked. "Out of Carson, headed toward Ridgemont." She replied without missing a beat. "Frozen goods. Due in the morning if this blizzard doesn't bury me first." Dispatch said the storm might ease up by dawn, but you know how that goes. Carson, Ridgemont. He knew both towns, and that was the same route he was on now. "Date tonight," he tried, keeping his tone light like it was a game. There was a brief, surprised laugh. "You looking to send me a birthday card? Wayfarer?" "Just checking my calendar skills." "Fine," she said. "It's November 13th, year of our collective bad decisions. 1998. She paused. "What? Is it different where you are?" Ethan's mouth went a little dry. He glanced at the digital readout on his dash. APR 2023 glowed softly back at him. The CB hissed gently between their words. "You're pulling my leg," he said. But the protest didn't quite reach his voice. "Wish I was," Blue June replied. "I'd rather be at home on my couch watching a movie than grinding gears through this icebox. If this is a prank, it's an elaborate one." He considered telling her the truth. That out his windows, the pavement was bare. That his phone, sitting in its cradle, showed a modern map with gas chain logos she'd never heard of. That the truck he was driving hadn't been built in 1998. But something in her tone, a practical focus, tinged with fatigue, made him hold back. Wherever she was, whatever she was talking through, she believed in it completely. "How are the roads at your mile marker?" she asked instead. "You said you're just past 318? "Dry," he said. "No ice, no snow, just cold and quiet." "Consider yourself lucky," she murmured. A horn blared faintly in her background. "And do yourself a favor. When you get up past that old Sinclair sign that never lights anymore, stick to the left. Right lane's a mess. I'm riding a rut here, and it's the only reason I'm not skating off into the ditch." "Sinclair sign?" he repeated slowly. "You know the one. Big dinosaur, halfway falling off the pole right before the hill at 321. They've been promising to fix it since I started running this lane." Ethan searched the darkness ahead. There was a metal framework on the right shoulder where a billboard used to stand, its panels long gone. No dinosaur, no gas station. The last Sinclair on this route had shut down years ago. Its sign had been taken away, leaving only bare uprights. "How far ahead is it for you?" he asked. "Couple miles," she said. "You'll see it when you get there. It's the only thing still green out here besides road signs." The CB crackled. Her voice wavered for a second, overlapped by a burst of distant music, a few bars of some song Ethan didn't recognize, tinny and far away. "Radio skip," he murmured. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." A silence stretched between them, full of miles and years. Then Blue June spoke again, softer. "Wayfarer, this is going to sound strange, but are you messing with me? Because I've heard stories about this stretch. Guys say they pick up odd things on 19. Voices that don't sound quite current." Ethan watched the ghostly white line on the right edge of the pavement flow through his lights. He knew that tone. The careful one. The one people used when they were bracing for something they didn't want to hear. "I heard those stories too," he admitted. "Back at the last stop, old-timer said the air plays tricks here. Old music, old ads." "Old music, huh?" she said. "Right now I've got that new track on repeat in my head. What's her name?" "Brittany something." "You telling me she's old music where you are?" He almost laughed, a small, humorless sound. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Something like that." The CB hissed again, louder. Outside, the road went on, flat and uneventful. No snow, no dinosaur sign, no other headlights visible. They talked a little longer. Nothing deep. Miles. Favorite truck stop diners. Annoying dispatchers. She mentioned fuel prices. That made his eyes widen. He mentioned apps and digital logs she'd never heard of. But the more they compared, the more wrong it felt. Finally, her voice crackled, faded, then snapped back. "Urgent now. Wayfarer. I'm losing you," she said. "Must be the hill. They never got good coverage out here." If you're really, wherever you say you are, do me a favor. Next time you run this road, if you hear Blue June again, tell her to watch herself around mile 323. She trailed off. I've got a bad feeling about it tonight. Feels like there's a wall up ahead and I can't quite see it. Static roared suddenly, drowning her out. Then the line went dead. The CB settled into soft, empty hiss. Ethan drove the rest of the dead air stretch in silence, the mic resting untouched on its hook. At mile 323, there was no wall, just more road, flat and dark and dry. A fox darted across 200 feet ahead of him, eyes flashing briefly in the beams, then vanished into the scrub. He didn't see another truck for 20 minutes. When he finally pulled into a small, all-night fuel stop outside Ridgemont, the empty quiet of the plains lifted slightly. Sodium lights buzzed overhead. The smell of gasoline and coffee and fried food drifted on the thin air. Inside the modest building, a TV played muted news in one corner. A handful of drivers hunched over their plates. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee he didn't really want and struck up conversation with the clerk, a woman whose name tag simply read Diane. Ever hear of someone runs by Blue June? He asked casually. Handle-wise, I mean. Sounds like a regular on 19 at night. Diane's expression shifted. Her eyes flicked to a corner of the wall where a corkboard hung, cluttered with notices and old flyers. Blue June? She repeated slowly. Haven't heard that handle in a while. One of the other drivers, a man with a gray mustache and a faded jacket, looked up from his food. You pick her up on the dead air tonight? He asked. Maybe, Ethan said carefully. The older man wiped his mouth. June was real enough, he said. Ran this corridor pretty hard back in the late 90s. Good driver. Sharp. Kept her rig immaculate. She was coming through in a bad winter storm blizzard. Ice. The whole show. Never checked in at Ridgemont. Never signed out at the last way station either. He glanced toward the window, where the empty lot glowed faintly. Search teams went up and down that stretch, he went on. No wreckage. No tracks off the road. Some said she must have taken a different route. Others, well, you know how stories grow. Folks started saying they could still hear her on the radio some nights when the conditions were just right. Diane nodded once, slowly. Guys come through here sometimes, she said. Say they had a whole conversation with a lady describing a storm they're not in. Always around mile 320-something. Always ends the same way. How's that? Ethan asked, though part of him already knew. She fades out, the older driver said quietly. Like she's climbing a hill and never gets over the top. No one mentioned accidents. No one described what might have happened beyond that invisible crest. They didn't have to. The not knowing was its own unease. Ethan finished his coffee and went back to the truck with the sound of Blue June's laugh still tucked somewhere in his mind. The next week, dispatch sent him on the same run. Same departure time, same route, same long empty night. A small, rational voice in his head suggested turning off the CB before he reached mile 312. Another part of him, the part that had spent years relying on radio calls to warn of sudden traffic, animals in the road, patches of black ice kept it on. The dead air stretch greeted him like before. The gradual thinning of chatter, the subtle hollowing of sound. At mile 318, just as the dark shape of the exit sign slid away, the speakers crackled. Radio check 19. Anybody out here reading Blue June? Her voice was the same. Same cadence, same weary humor under the words. But there was no recognition in it. No awareness that she'd spoken to him before. Ethan pressed his mic. Reading you, Blue June. Wayfarer here. Westbound near 318. Silence. It stretched just long enough for him to wonder if she'd heard. Then, Wayfarer, she said slowly. You must be my good luck charm. I never get company out here in this blizzard. He stared out at the dry, starlit highway. In his mind's eye, he pictured another version of this same road, buried under swirling white, everything muffled and blurred. Storm still bad? He asked. Worse, she replied. Winds picked up. I can feel her trying to push the trailer. I swear, if I wasn't loaded, I'd be upside down in a field by now. Where'd you say you were again? Same stretch, he said. Dead air. Just a different kind of night. They talked again. This time, he steered the conversation more deliberately. He asked for small details. her company name, the make of her truck, the year stamped on her dash registration. Everything lined up with what that older driver had said in the diner. When he mentioned apps and digital logs, she laughed like he'd told a joke. When he hummed a few notes of a song that had been a hit 2 summers ago, she didn't recognize it. Blue June, he said at one point, the words leaving his mouth before he fully planned them. If you had one place out here you really didn't like, where would it be? She was quiet for a long moment. There's a hill, she said finally, past the old Sinclair sign. Seems like the storm always hits hardest there. Wind funnel's just wrong. Feels, I don't know, heavy. I get this twist in my gut every time I start up it. Mile marker? He asked gently. 3:23, she said without hesitation. That's the one that gives me the creeps. Why? He didn't answer right away. Outside, the land slipped by. His own odometer crept closer to that number. There was no hill ahead in his lights. The road waved slightly, gentle and easy. No steep grade. Any major dips or rises had been ironed out in roadwork years before. What if, he began, then stopped. How did someone tell a voice from another time that they might not have made it past a particular patch of asphalt? That their last living thoughts had perhaps passed through a radio like this? What if you took it slower tonight, he said instead, or pulled off before you reached it, sat it out? Her laugh came back, rougher now. You sound like my dispatcher, she said. Deadlines don't notice the weather. Besides, I've done this trip 100 times. Gut feelings or no gut feelings, cargo's gotta get where it's going. A squall of static shivered through the line. Still, he said carefully, if you get an option to turn off before that hill, maybe consider it. Even for a few minutes. You offering me alternate routes from your magical dry road? She teased. You could say that. He gave her descriptions of exits that existed in his world rest areas. Widened shoulders, bigger pull-offs, places she didn't seem to recognize. Got a narrow strip on the right a mile before the climb, she said. Barely room for a rig. That's about it. Then use it, he urged. Just this once. Static rose again. Louder now. Wayfarer, she said slowly. You sound like you know something I don't. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. No one at that diner had ever said for certain what happened to her. The mystery hung as heavy as whatever snow she described. Before he could answer, her voice flickered, cut, came back in jagged pieces. Winds. Bad. Can barely. See. He tensed, thumb pressed white on the mic button. Blue June? Her reply came through in fragments. Getting close. Sign. Can see the dinosaur. Lights are out. Pull over, he said. Now, if you can hear me, just stop. Can't, she said faintly. No traction if I... The hill, it's... Static exploded in his cab, a roar like rushing wind. Then nothing. Just the low hiss of dead air. Ethan drove the rest of the way in hollow quiet, a weight in his chest that matched the emptiness of the road. 2 nights later, an unseasonal storm rolled in. The forecast said it would skirt north of the highway. Drivers at the last fuel stop traded opinions, shrugged, watched clouds stack up on the horizon. Dispatch insisted the schedule didn't change. You're fine, the office voice said over the phone. Storm's not even hitting your county. An hour into the dead air stretch, snow began. At first it was a light dusting, just enough to silver the shoulders and blur the lines. Then the wind picked up, and fine white streaks rushed through his beams like thousands of tiny comets. The world beyond the windshield shrank until it was just light and motion and the shape of the center stripes flashing by. Ethan slowed. The rig felt different now, more alive under his hands, reacting to every gust. Other drivers checked in over 19. Reports came in from ahead. Slick spots, near misses, jackknife trailers that had barely been straightened out. Somewhere in the swirl of voices, like a station tuning itself in, a familiar tone emerged. Radio check 19. Anybody out here reading Blue June? Her voice was clearer than ever, as though the storm had dragged her closer. Ethan's chest tightened. Reading you, he said. Wayfarer here. You sure picked a bad night to copy my trip, Wayfarer, she said. But there was an edge in her voice now, a tremor that matched the shudder of his wipers. Storm caught up with you too, huh? Looks that way, he answered. Snowflakes flurried past the glass in dense patterns. The road ahead was a white ribbon with faint, dark lines where other tires had gone. "Then listen to me," she said, suddenly urgent. "However it is where you are, however different, I need you to pay attention now." He swallowed. "I'm listening. I'm coming up on that hill again," she said. "Same as before. I can feel it. The way the truck pulls, the way the wind sings on the mirrors. It's always the same." Her breathing came through the speaker, faint but fast. "I've talked to you before," she went on. "Or someone like you. Voices from clear nights, clear roads. I never hear what happens to them after. But for me, it always stops here. My radio, my headlights, everything like somebody cuts the tape." The snow outside his cab thickened, swirling in chaotic shapes. His speedometer dipped as he eased off the throttle more. "You at 320? he asked. 3:21, she said. "Sign just passed. That dinosaur is still hanging crooked. Snow's past my bumper. Wind's worse." Ethan peered through the blizzard. Up ahead, indistinct in the wash of his beams, something tall and crooked stood by the side of the road. A rusted metal frame. No dinosaur, no green logo, just the bare skeleton of what might once have held a sign. A cold thrill slid along his spine. "I see your pole," he said quietly. "But my sign's gone." Blue June laughed once, short and breathless. "Guess time eats everything eventually." Her voice crackled. Behind it, Ethan heard another noise, deep and low, like distant thunder, or the approach of a heavy engine. "Listen," she said. "I can feel it this time. There's something waiting up there. I don't know if it's a jackknifed rig or a patch of black ice or just the end of my tape. But if I tell you not to follow me, will you listen?" Snow thickened. His wipers squealed across the glass. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Somebody said once there's a maintenance road before the hill," she said quickly. "Narrow and dirty, but solid. Maybe in your time they widened it, I don't know. On my side, it's barely a scrape in the snow. I never see it in time. I'm always too far in, too heavy, too late." Her words tumbled now, overlapping with the hiss. "If you can find it, take it. Get off the main line before the top. If you clear that hill without me, maybe that's enough." Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. Visibility had shrunk to a small, shifting window of white and gray. The road beneath his tires felt less sure. A small sideways tug hinted at ice. "Blue June," he said. "If I turn off, I can't warn you what's up there." "You already have," she replied softly. "Just by being there. Just by saying the sign's gone." She paused. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "Don't let my road be your road too." The CB popped, once, like a knuckle cracking. Up ahead, through the blur of snow, a dark notch appeared on the right shoulder, a break in the metal guardrail, a short, rough strip leading off into shadows, a narrow maintenance access. In clear weather, he might have driven past without thinking. In this, it looked like the only definite shape in a world gone soft. His map app, half lost under the storm of static from his phone speaker, showed nothing there. No marked road, just faint, thin gray. "Coming up on something," he said. "Small turnoff on my right." "That's where I always mean to go," Blue June said. "That's where I never make it. Either I don't see it, or there's a truck in front of me, or the trailer's already sliding. Every time. Her voice wavered, like a radio with a loose connection. "How many times?" he asked before he could stop himself. A long silence. Then very quietly, "Enough to lose count." Snow hissed against his windshield. The access road loomed. Ethan eased off the main lane, steering the rig toward the dark notch. The tires bit into packed snow, then crunched onto less traveled ground. The trailer tugged once, then straightened behind him. He felt the whole truck settle, like a long breath finally let out. He crept along the narrow strip. It paralleled the main road at a lower elevation, separated by a shallow ditch and a rise of plowed snow. Through gaps in the white, he could sometimes see the faint, ghostly glow of the highway above. The CB grew louder. "Wayfarer?" Blue June said. Her voice sounded farther now, echoing strangely. "You still with me?" "I'm here," he answered. "I took the side road. I'm off the hill." A strange, soft sound came through the speaker then. It might have been relief. It might have been something like a sob. "Good," she said. "Good. Maybe that's all it ever needed. Someone to make a different choice." She drew in a breath. "I'm hitting the grade now," she whispered. "Snows. Thick. Winds pushing. Can't see more than—" Her words cut off. For a moment, all he could hear was a roar of static, loud and full, like a storm rushing directly through the wires instead of around the truck. Beneath it, faintly, he thought he heard other sounds layered in a horn, a shouted word, the distant scrape of something heavy losing its grip. Then there was a dull, muffled thud in the distance, felt more than heard. A brief blooming of light ahead and above, hazy through the snow, like headlights flaring and swinging wildly before winking out. The static on the CB dropped away, leaving only a thin, high hiss. "Blue June?" Ethan said, his voice very small in the cab. No answer. Only the quiet rush of the storm and the low growl of his engine. He followed the maintenance road until it curved gently back toward the highway, blending into an official on-ramp half a mile past where the hill crested. When he merged again with the main lanes, the snow had begun to ease. Visibility stretching just enough to see. Up ahead, faint flashing lights painted the haze red and blue. Emergency vehicles crowded the shoulder. A couple of four-wheel drives sat at crooked angles. A small box truck had gone partway into the median, its back end tilted awkwardly. The situation looked contained, more inconvenience than catastrophe. Ethan slowed, passed with care, eyes skimming the scene. There was no sign of a blue rig like the one the older driver had described. No sign of a truck stopped sideways across the road. No twisted wreckage. Just the aftermath of a bad patch of ice on a winter night, and the professionals cleaning it up. He drove on. Past mile marker 324, the clouds began to break. Stars reappeared, pinpricks of cold light above the clearing storm. The snow under his tires turned gradually to wet pavement, then dried. The CB remained quiet. In the weeks that followed, he ran that route many times. Sometimes by day, sometimes under the cover of darkness. The dead air stretch went back to being just a long, uneventful piece of highway. Some skipped signals here and there. Some quiet. Some routine chatter. He never heard Blue June again. At a truck stop a month later, in a different state, he noticed a framed newspaper clipping on the wall near the payphones. The headline, yellowed with age, mentioned a freak November blizzard and a search that had turned up no trace of a missing driver. The photo beneath showed a woman in a denim jacket leaning against a mid-90 seconds rig. She was smiling, one hand resting on the truck's door. A small patch on her cap read, "Blue June," in stitched letters. Someone had tucked a scrap of paper into the corner of the frame, barely held by the edge of the glass. In scrawled handwriting, faded by time, a line read, "If you hear Blue June on 19, listen. She's trying." Ethan stood there for a long time, the murmur of the diner around him fading into its own kind of static. Out on the highway, the dead air stretch waited, quiet and unremarkable. The old Sinclair sign had long since rusted away. The maintenance road, now widened and graveled, showed up properly on maps. On clear nights, if a driver passed that way with their CB on, sometimes the channel stayed empty. Sometimes they heard ordinary voices, ordinary warnings, and sometimes, just as they rolled past mile marker 323, the radio would crackle, as if deciding whether or not to let something through. But whatever waited on the other side of that invisible hill seemed, at last, to have released its hold. Story number 4. By the time the company decided to retire his rig, Ben had driven it across the country enough times to circle the planet more than once. The red Kenworth wasn't just steel and bolts to him. It was 20 years of nights on the road, coffees at strange hours, and quiet miles where it felt like the only thing tying him to the world was the hum of the engine and the ribbon of highway ahead. They called it Fleet Unit 74 on paper. To him, it had always just been old iron. The new fleet had already started rolling into the yard sleek, aerodynamic tractors with digital dashboards and engines that sounded more like careful whispers than throaty roars. The company wanted him in one of those. Better fuel economy, better telemetry, better everything. But first, he had to deliver old iron to the asset recovery depot. Northline Industrial Lot C, dispatch had said over the phone. End of the line for the old girl. They'll strip her, ship what's left. Shuttle will bring you back in the morning. Easy night. He'd laughed, but the sound had come out thin. Northline Industrial sat on the far edge of the city, where the glow of office parks gave way to warehouses and rail lines, and the smell of hot asphalt turned into cold dust and oil. Lot C was a name that didn't do it justice. It was, more simply, the graveyard where trucks went when they weren't trucks anymore. Drivers had other names for it. The boneyard, the final lot, the field. Not many of them had slept there. Ben left late. Office hours and his own stubbornness had pushed him to the edge of his clock. On his last run with Old Iron, he took his time. He let the old engine wind out slowly on the uphill grades and roll easy on the downs. He knew every rattle in the dash, every stain on the upholstery, every spot on the steering wheel where years of his hands had worn the leather smooth and shiny. The city's lights shrank in his mirrors. Out ahead, the industrial stretch rose up a low forest of cranes and smokestacks, stacks of shipping containers, tall sodium lamps, turning everything a tired yellow. The gate to Northline Industrial appeared at the end of a long, empty road. Fences topped with razor wire ran off in both directions. A small guard shack glowed beside the entrance, its windows fogged lightly from the heat inside. He rolled to a stop, air brakes sighing. A man in a heavy jacket and orange vest stepped out of the shack, pulling a knit cap down over his ears. He walked up to the driver's side with the slow, resigned walk of someone used to midnight shifts in cold places. "Evenin'," the man said. His name tag, half hidden under the vest, read Ron. "You must be our last one." "Unit 74, Ben said. Saying the number instead of the name felt wrong in his mouth. "Here for Lot C." Ron glanced at a clipboard, then up at the truck. "Yep, 10-4. You're in the right place." He handed over a laminated visitor badge on a lanyard. "Wear that if you're outside the vehicle. Yard workers are thin tonight, so stay in your lane, follow the arrows. You'll see a set of blue cones. Back her into one of the empty slots in row E." He hesitated, then added, "You staying with her?" "Shuttle's not till morning, right?" Ben said. "Figure I'll grab a few hours in the sleeper. She and I got one last night to share." Ron's expression flickered. It wasn't quite a frown, not quite a smile. More like the look someone wears when deciding how much to say. "Most fellas drop 'em and go," he said slowly. "We've got a little break room in Building A, if you'd prefer walls around you." "Walls won't smell like coffee and diesel," Ben said, trying to keep it light. "I'll be fine. Spent plenty of nights in this bunk." Ron's gaze slid past him, toward the interior of the yard. Overhead, tall lamps blazed down on a sprawl of metal and concrete. Rows upon rows of trucks sat nose to tail, some whole, some stripped, some missing windshields or doors. Shadows pooled deep between them, like narrow canyons. "It's a loud yard," Ron said eventually. "At night, metal settles. The cranes shift. You hear things." He motioned with his chin toward Ben's dash. "Keep your doors locked. Leave your CB off if you want to sleep. We've had guys say, well, night plays tricks. Especially your last night with a rig." He seemed embarrassed as soon as the words left his mouth. Ben nodded. "Appreciate the heads up." He eased Old Iron through the gate. The chain-link fence rattled briefly as it closed behind him, the metallic clang echoing off the stacked containers. The yard's layout was simple but overwhelming. Rows of vehicles stretched in every direction. Some bore fresh company logos, just a little out of date. Others wore color schemes he hadn't seen since his early days. A green stripe the company had abandoned in the 90 seconds, a blocky font that had long since been replaced. Between the rows, wide aisles ran like streets in a silent city. He found the row marked with a sprayed-on E and followed it inward. Lot C seemed to run on forever. Hundreds of trucks. Trucks he might have passed on highways years before, now standing quiet and still faced forward in neat lines, their grills and headlights like a crowd of empty faces. At the far end, a cluster of blue cones marked a gap in the row. Ben backed Old Iron into the slot with the kind of ease that only comes after countless docks and yards. The trailer's bumpers kissed the concrete stop with a soft thud. He set the brake, shut off the engine, and listened as the last vibrations faded out of the cab. Silence rushed in to replace it, thick and strangely humming. Somewhere distant, a crane clanked. A dog barked once, far away. then went quiet. He filled out the drop paperwork by the pale glow of the overhead light. The form's last question read, "Keys left in designated box." He checked NO, writing instead, "Driver remaining on. Site until 0600 per dispatch." He slid the form into the mail slot on a steel pedestal and returned to the cab, the badge lanyard cold against his neck. Inside, the sleeper felt smaller than usual. Maybe it was the knowledge that this was it. No more nights like this in this particular hollow of metal and upholstery. He propped a pillow behind his head and lay on his back for a while, staring at the faint seam where the ceiling panel met the wall. Outside, the overhead lamps cast a yellowish wash over the rows. Through the small side window, he could see only parts of the truck beside him, its fuel tank, a stripe of faded paint, a tire gone soft, and slightly collapsed. He meant to stay awake a while. To think. To say his own kind of goodbye. At some point, the quiet and the day's miles caught up with him. He drifted off. He didn't know what woke him. Later, he would try to pin it down. A sound, a shift, some subtle change in the air, but all he could say for sure was that one moment he was asleep, and the next he was sitting upright in the bunk, heart tapping a little faster, eyes wide open in the dimness. The cab was dark, save for the faint glow of the clock on the dash. 3:11 a.m. He listened. At first, he heard only the gentle ticking of metal cooling somewhere deep in the engine block. Then, slowly, other sounds bled in from outside. An engine idling. Another one, joining it. The low, familiar vibration of diesel rumbles rose like a distant chorus, felt more than heard through the floor and mattress. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. The air inside the cab seemed to buzz with it. Ben slid out of the bunk and swung his feet to the floor. The air was colder now. The small patch of window visible from the sleeper glowed yellow-white from the yard lights. He moved to the driver's seat and sat, peering out through the windshield. Lot C had changed. No, he corrected himself. It hadn't. The rows were the same lines of tractors and trailers stretching off into the dark. The same scuffs on the pavement. The same stacks of tires in the distance. But scattered among the still shapes were points of light that hadn't been there before. Headlights, marker lights. Here and there, at the ends of rows, trucks sat with their running lights glowing a soft amber outlining hoods and mirrors. Thin curls of exhaust drifted upward from a few stacks, pale in the lamps. Engines idled, some low and steady, others with the faint unevenness of older motors. Ben blinked and rubbed at his eyes. He knew he had shut his own rig down completely. Company policy and plain sense both said the units in Lot C should be dead batteries disconnected, engines cold. Yet somewhere to his left, a horn gave a short, muffled honk, like a greeting held back. Another responded on the far right, mellow and distant. The CB, which he always turned off when parked for the night, crackled softly. For a second, his heart lurched. Ron's warning replayed in his mind. Leave your CB off if you want to sleep. He glanced at the unit. The power knob sat in the off position. Still, a faint hiss bled from the speaker. Then, layered within it, he heard a familiar pattern of static pops and tiny flares, like someone briefly keying a mic and letting it go before saying anything. His hand hovered over the knob, but he didn't turn it. Outside, the nearest truck in row E, a white Freightliner missing its grille, and one headlight had come to a kind of half-life. Its remaining headlamp glowed dimly. The small clearance lights along its roof blinked lazily, out of sync. The cab windows were dark, no movement inside. The engine noise that seemed to pulse from all directions had no clear source. Every truck he could see in detail was still, yet the air thrummed. He opened his door a crack. Sound washed in more clearly. Engines, dozens of them. Not loud, not the full-throated roar of highway speeds, but that contained, steady growl of trucks idling in place. He stepped down onto the cold concrete, boots crunching over a stray nut or stone. The night air smelled sharp metal, oil, a trace of old exhaust. His breath fogged. He closed the door gently and stood there for a moment, listening. The row behind him seemed deeper, more crowded. When he turned, he realized that at some point, while he'd been watching the nearer vehicles, a line of trucks beyond had lit up. Soft glows marked their outlines like faint halos. One old cab over with his company's long-retired green stripe idled with a slight, uneven shake that tugged at some early memory. He'd learned to drive in one just like that, clutch so stiff his left leg had ached for days. He walked toward it slowly. Up close, the truck looked every bit its age in daylight terms, paint dull and flaking, rubber spidered with cracks, mirror glass mottled. But its headlamps burned with a clear white light, and somewhere deep inside, a motor churned patiently. He stepped onto the running board and peered through the window. The driver's seat was empty. The key wasn't in the ignition. The gauge cluster glowed weak green, needles holding steady readings, oil pressure, volts, RPM, all saying the impossible. The engine was running. Ben felt the fine hairs on his arms rise. A faint sound drifted from the cab's interior. At first, he thought it was the CB again, some radio left on, picking up distant chatter. But there was no display lit on the unit in the dash. Instead, the sound seemed older, flatter, like a memory of voices rather than the voices themselves. Mile 220. Gonna try and beat the storm. Drops on time. Tell him to keep the doors open. Half sentences, words without context, layered atop one another in a murmur that faded if he leaned closer, louder if he stepped back. He moved away, boots echoing lightly between the rows. Elsewhere in the lot, other trucks idled without drivers. A blue Peterbilt with half its hood missing. A box truck with a company logo from a division that had closed 15 years earlier. A tanker spotted with rust-like freckles. Their marker lights glowed in fits and starts, like breathing. At the far end of Row E, beyond where Old Iron sat, a handful of rigs near the perimeter fence flicked their high beams on and off in a slow pattern. It reminded him of a signal, or maybe a convoy getting ready to move, drivers letting each other know they were awake, ready. Except there were no drivers. The chain-link fence beyond them stood silent, topped with its loops of razor wire, gate chained and locked. Beyond that, the darkness of an unlit service road. The CB and Old Iron's cab hissed again, a small, insistent sound behind him. He turned back. As he walked, he noticed something else. Between the sleeping trucks with dark windows and the idling ones, there was no clear division in make or year. Newer models sat silent. Older ones glowed, but scattered among them were a few rigs that looked untouched by time. Their paint was clean, their tires full, chrome gleaming even in the low light. Their company logos were ones he recognized, but the DOT numbers on the doors belonged to branches that no longer existed. He slowed in front of one. A burgundy Kenworth with polished tanks, and an old safety slogan on the side, "Take 10, arrive again." He hadn't seen that phrase in years. On its left-hand fuel tank, someone had once painted a small, curling script, "Lucky 7. The lettering was faded but still visible. Ben knew that name. Lucky 7 had been the handle of a driver he'd run with in his early days. A man who'd taught him how to double clutch, how to read the wind in flags along the road. A man who had one day simply not come back from a mountain run in the winter. Standing there, looking at the spotless paint and spotless windshield, Ben realized something else. He had sent off Old Iron that morning from the company yard with a quick pat on the steering wheel and a muttered, "See you on the other side." Somewhere in the back of his mind, he'd comforted himself with the thought of the truck's parts living on in other rigs. Wheels turned into someone else's motion. Pieces scattered, but useful. Here, though, the trucks that had already run their final miles hadn't fully let go. They were gathering. Back at his own cab, the CB hissed louder, as though it sensed his return. The power knob still sat solidly in the off position, yet the speaker crackled with faint, shifting noise. Ben climbed in and closed the door, shutting out a portion of the night's strangeness. The cab was cooler now, air thin. He reached for the CB, thumb hovering over the switch. "Don't," he thought. He turned it on. The unit hum came to life. The channel lights flickered. For a second, there was only clean, normal static, the background fuzz he'd heard thousands of times. Then a voice spoke, very softly, buried in the noise. "Breaker, 19. Anybody copy?" It was the kind of call he'd heard 1,000 times. Except the handle that followed it was one he hadn't heard since the old green stripe days. "Lucky 7, northbound. Anybody got your ears on?" Ben's breath caught. He swallowed once, hard, and picked up the mic. His thumb trembled very slightly on the talk switch. "Lucky 7, he said, the words feeling years thick in his mouth. "This is Old Iron. I hear you." Silence. Just as he was beginning to think he had imagined it, the static shifted again, coalescing. "Old iron," the voice said, distant and thin, as if it came through layers of snow and time. "You finally made it down here." It sounded like he remembered warm, with a trace of perpetual amusement. No fear, no pain. Just the easy tone of a man with a long road ahead and a good rig under him. Ben's fingers tightened around the mic. "Where's down here?" he asked quietly. The lights outside seemed to pulse in his peripheral vision, the yard breathing with them. "Lot C, row N, past the wrecked tankers." The voice replied. "Been parked a while. Figured you'd join us sooner or later." Ben pictured the far end of the yard he hadn't explored yet. The thought of walking deeper between the rows turned his mouth dry. "What is this place to you?" he said. "Scrapyard? Final stop?" There was a rustle, like cloth shifting, maybe just interference. "Last run, Lucky 7, said. "All the miles you didn't get to drive, they pile up. Somewhere. You feel them, don't you? Every place you had to slam the brakes when you wanted to roll on. Every time you sat at home thinking about the road instead of sleeping." Ben didn't answer. He didn't have to. His chest ached with a quiet, nameless longing he'd never quite admitted out loud. "Tonight's when they sort us," the voice went on, soft, almost conversational. "Trucks that are done. Drivers that aren't. Lines get tangled. Sometimes guys climb into the wrong seat." Outside, beyond the glass, the line of idling rigs near the fence shifted. Slowly, with a strange grace, their front wheels turned in unison, straightening. One by one, their marker lights brightened. The gate at the far end of the yard, the one he knew was chained, seemed less solid. The shadows around it deepened. On the CB, Lucky 7's voice dropped, gaining a weight that had nothing to do with radio interference. "Stay put tonight, old iron," he said. "You got miles left. So does your driver. Don't let the hum drag you out." Ben glanced at his own ignition. The key rested where he'd left it, turned off, a simple piece of metal and plastic. Yet, as he watched, it twitched. Not much. Just a tiny, almost imagined movement, like the shiver of something in a breeze. His heart thudded once. The dash lights flickered weakly, as if the truck were drawing power from somewhere that wasn't the battery. For a second, the gauges hiccuped to life needles jumping, warning bulbs glowing faint and red before dropping back to dark. From the speaker, the murmur of other voices rose, a crowd heard through a wall. Snatches of handles, half-jokes, place names. "Running late. Got a tailwind through Amarillo. 30 minutes till shift change. Never thought I'd miss that diner." It sounded like a kind of gathering, everyone talking at once, layered over the steady, impossible rumble of idle engines. A deeper horn blared outside. Not sharp, not an alarm. More like a long, low note calling something to attention. Down by the fence, the line of trucks in front of the gate began to move. Slowly at first, like they were remembering how. Their headlights brightened, beams cutting through the yard's artificial light. Brake lights flared, signals blinked. No drivers' silhouettes showed behind the glass. No figures stepped out to check tires or bang on doors. The rigs rolled forward on their own, maintaining perfectly spaced gaps, turning their wheels as if following a choreography long practiced. They approached the gate. Ben knew it was locked. He'd seen the heavy chain, the padlock, the sign that read, "Authorized vehicles only." The first truck met the fence. For a dizzy second, it simply passed through. Not with a crash of torn metal and scattering links. Not with any sound at all. One heartbeat it was this side. The next it was slightly beyond, its red taillights dwindling into the dark as if the fence were only a patch of shadow. The trucks behind it followed. Each one reached the barrier and slipped through, no crunch, no twist, no bent posts. They vanished into the nothing beyond, their lights blending with the sparse street lamps of the distant industrial roads. On the CB, the murmur swelled, then thinned, like a crowd filing out of a room. "See you on the other side. Leave the light on. One more run." Lucky 7's voice came back, closer than before, like he had stepped up beside Old Iron's phantom door. "You hear that sound?" he asked. Ben did. Underneath everything, beneath the idling hum and the static in his own pulse, he heard something else. An emptiness being filled. A thirst being slaked. It was like the feel of an open highway at night when you finally get free of city lights, a space opening up, inviting, impossible to ignore. It's easy to follow it, Lucky 7 said. Feels like what you were made for. But that road doesn't stop. Ben's hand had tightened on the mic so hard his knuckles ached. What happens if I go? He asked quietly. The silence that followed was long enough to count in breaths. Finally, Lucky 7 answered. You don't come back to yards, he said. Or diners, or way stations, or home. You just keep driving. All the exits say the same thing. Every mile marker's worn blank. A shiver passed through the cab. The overhead light brightened for a second, as though fed by some unseen surge, then dimmed. The ignition key twitched again. Slowly now, unmistakably, it began to turn. Past ACC. Toward on. Ben jerked forward, grabbed the key, and held it still. The sensation of resistance under his fingers wasn't mechanical. It felt more like the faint reluctance of a dog pulled back from a door. Not yet, he said under his breath. We're not done yet. The CB crackled. That's it, old iron, Lucky 7 said, voice softer now. That's all it takes. Say no. Let him take the empty seats. The line of trucks at the far end had vanished beyond the fence, their taillights lost in the industrial dark. For a moment, the yard felt emptier than it had when he arrived, like a breath held too long finally let go. Gradually, the unnatural engine noise began to fade. One by one, the glowing marker lights winked out. The few idling sounds dwindled, slipping into silence. The burgundy Kenworth with Lucky 7 on the tank dimmed, its spotless headlights going dark, cab sinking back into shadow. The CB hiss smoothed out into ordinary static. Ben's grip on the key lessened. It stayed where he held it, off, just as it always had. See you when it's time, Lucky 7 said quietly. But not before. Got it? Got it, Ben murmured. The radio went quiet. Outside, Lot C looked once more like what it was on paper. A wide graveyard of machines awaiting dismantling. Trucks sat in their rows, dark and still. The only running engine was a far-off forklift doing some late shifting down by a warehouse. The air felt strangely thin. Ben sat in the driver's seat for a long time, watching nothing move. He considered starting Old Iron, just for the familiar comfort of the sound. But the memory of those other trucks gliding through a fence with no drivers at their wheels kept his hand off the key. Eventually, he slipped back into the sleeper and lay down. Sleep did not come quickly. When it did, it was shallow and full of vague dreams of endless roads with no signs. Dawn came pale and slow, the sodium lights clicking off one by one. Birds sang from somewhere beyond the yard fence, their normal morning chatter almost jarring after the night's strange symphony. A pickup rattled past outside, driven by some early shift worker heading to a factory down the way. At 6:02, Ron knocked on the cab door, making Ben startle only slightly. You still with us? The guard called. Ben opened the door. Morning light painted everything softer. Rust stains, peeling paint, cracked tires, Lot C in full, ordinary detail. Yeah, Ben said. His voice came out rough. Didn't sleep much. Ron squinted up at him. Most don't, he said. You see anything? Weird? The word hung there, carrying more meaning than it should. Ben thought of phantom headlights, engines without drivers, a voice out of the static using a handle that belonged to another decade. He looked past Ron, toward the far end of the yard. Row N, wherever it was, looked like any other lines of silent metal. If there were trucks there that had rolled through fences on their own 4 hours earlier, they showed no sign of it now. Just a lot of memories, he said finally. Place is thick with them. Ron nodded, as if that were an answer he understood. That it is. Some folks say it gets loud sometimes. Dispatch asked us to stop scheduling overnights in the cabs a while back. Paperwork doesn't say why. He jerked his thumb toward a low, square building painted company beige. Shuttle's ready when you are. Got coffee in the break room. Ben climbed down. He paused beside Old Iron, resting a hand flat on the red paint of the fender. It was cold under his palm, no hidden hum, no nervous twitch in the key. Thanks, he said quietly. He wasn't sure whether he meant the miles they'd shared or the last few hours. In the shuttle, as the van rolled toward the exit, he glanced back through the rear window. Lot C receded. Rows of trucks shrank into patterns of color and shadow. For a second, just as they neared the gate, he thought he saw a burgundy Kenworth parked slightly apart from the others, its marker lights blinking once in the growing day. A small greeting, a small farewell. Then the van turned, the fence slid out of view, and the industrial park swallowed the scene. Later that week, in his brand new, quiet, digital-laden tractor, Ben merged onto a familiar highway in the pre-dawn dark. The world ahead looked clean and open. The steering felt strangely light in his hands. The engine's sound barely crept into the cab. He reached over and turned on the CB. Static filled the speaker, then settled. "Breaker 19, he said, voice steady. "Anybody got ears on way station Ben, eastbound and easy?" Voices answered him living, present, ordinary. Weather from 3 exits ahead. A heads up about a patrol car in the median. A joke about truck stop coffee. He listened, nodded, added his own short replies. Somewhere, beyond paddocks and rail yards and thin lines of asphalt, there was a fenced lot full of old rigs holding the echoes of all the miles they'd run. And somewhere beyond that, if the stories were right, there was a road that never ended. But for now, his wheels were on a numbered highway. His logbook had fresh pages, and the next exit had a diner he knew by smell alone. The hum under his seat felt like what it was supposed to be. Just the engine of a living truck, not the pull of something waiting to turn every night into one long final drive. Story number 5. For most of his career, Luis avoided mountain detours at night if he could help it. He liked wide interstates, open plains, places where you could see trouble coming from a mile away. But sometimes, the road didn't care what anybody liked. He was hauling electronics this time, sealed trailer, high-value load, company very particular about schedules. The route should have been simple. Interstate all the way through the pass, drop at a distribution center by morning, turn and burn back east. Halfway into the run, a glowing sign over the highway changed all of that. Interstate closed ahead. Major accident. Use alt route. Exit 142. The digital letters blinked in an uneasy orange. Red brake lights were already stacking up ahead. Trucks were easing into the right lane, turn signals blinking, like a slow-moving river changing course. Luis swore under his breath and flicked his blinker on, following the line. His GPS chimed, cool and unconcerned, as it redrew his path. Rerouting. Take exit 140. 2 toward County Highway 9. The voice said. Estimated delay. 1 hour 15 minutes. 2. 1 hour and 15 was a lot when he was already pushing the edges of his clock. He eased the rig down the ramp and onto a smaller highway that curved away into the dark. Tall pines crowded up on both sides, swallowing the last of the interstate's wide-open feeling. He turned the radio down to a soft murmur. The CB was quiet, most drivers likely assessing their options. Phones out, maps up. The detour road started friendly enough, 2 lanes, clear paint, decent shoulders. A modest local gas station flashed past on the right, its single pump under a sagging canopy, windows bright around a lone tired clerk. Then the trees thickened, and the world shrank. His headlights cut through a tangle of trunks and brush. The road began to climb in slow, lazy curves. The steel guardrail on his right side appeared and disappeared in his beams, a silver thread between him and the unseen drop. Luis kept his speed reasonable. Heavy load, unfamiliar road. Night in the mountains, he'd stacked those factors enough times in his mind to know where the risk line lay. After a few miles, reflective orange signs started popping up, shining hard in his lights. Road work ahead. Right lane closed 2 miles. Merge left. He frowned. A work zone on the detour. Of course. Traffic thinned behind him as some drivers chose to turn off onto smaller side roads, trusting their own shortcuts or local knowledge. Luis stuck with the detour. Company policy was very clear about unauthorized routes. More signs. 1 lane ahead. Prepare to stop. He rolled off the throttle, foot hovering nearer the brake. The road here was narrower, hugging the side of the mountain. State crews like to do night work in stretches like this, to minimize daytime closures. Around the next bend, he saw the work zone lights. Tall, portable towers flooded the road with harsh white. Cones pinched traffic down to a single lane, zigzagging the available path. Bright orange barrels stood like sentries, their reflective bands glaring back at him. He saw no equipment. No excavators, no dump trucks. Just the lights, the cones, and signs. At the start of the taper, a familiar rectangle stood on a metal tripod. Follow pilot car, do not pass. Empty road stretched ahead. No pilot car in sight. Luis coasted to a stop just before the sign, air brakes sighing. He glanced at his watch, then at the fuel gauge. All good. Time? Less good. He flicked his high beams down the work zone. The road curved out of sight between the cones. Beyond the wash of the lights, deeper darkness waited. He picked up the mic. "Anybody else hung up at the one lane on the 9? He asked on Channel 19. "Luis here, westbound. Looking for the pilot." Static pressed back. After a moment, another voice answered, a woman with a slight twang. "Yeah, that's a 10 to 4, westbound," she said. "You're just behind me, I'm guessing. White reefer? Sunflowers on the doors?" He checked his mirrors. Sure enough, a set of headlights had pulled in behind him during the last stretch close enough that he hadn't noticed the logo. "That's me," he said. "You see anyone out there?" "I've got nobody on point." "Same story," she replied. "Been sitting here about 5 minutes. Last time I rolled through this mountain, they at least had a pickup with a sign and some blinkers on it." He leaned a little forward in his seat, trying to peer around the first bend of the coned-off lane. The work lights threw sharp shadows. Everything beyond them dissolved into black. "Enough traffic backed up yet?" he asked. "Sometimes they don't bother with the pilot car until more of us are lined up." He flipped on his four-ways, more as habit than necessity. "Don't know," the woman's voice said. "My mirror's just full of night." He considered creeping forward, slowly weaving through the cones. But one bad patch of half-finished pavement or a missing guardrail could put him in real trouble, especially with this weight behind him. The nights had carved a cautious patience into him, whether he liked it or not. He settled in to wait. Minutes slid by. The work lights hummed. An occasional moth spiraled through their glow, wings a blur before vanishing back into the dark. No machinery moved. No workers in reflective vests appeared. Just as he was about to key the mic again, something shifted. It was small at first. A glow appearing over the rise ahead, bobbing, moving closer. Headlights. A vehicle rounded the curve inside the work zone, moving toward him. It was a pickup, white or maybe light gray, hard to tell in the harsh glare. An orange light bar sat on its roof, pulsing a slow, steady pattern. A rectangular sign on a frame rose from the bed. "Pilot car, follow me." Luis exhaled once, tension easing a little. There it was. Late, but there. He flicked his headlights to get their attention. The pickup slowed as it approached, then pulled up alongside his cab on the opposite side of the cones, idling in the unmarked lane. The driver's window was tinted, dark. For a moment, all Luis could see of the person inside was the pale oval of a face, features washed out by reflections. The man lifted a gloved hand and gave a small, flat wave, then pointed ahead, tapping 2 fingers toward the work zone. Luis nodded and gestured back, thankful for any sign of forward motion. The pickup eased past and pulled into position in front of him, its sign now clearly legible in his headlights. The light bar splashed orange across the cones. On the CB, the woman behind him spoke. "Looks like we got our leader," she said. "About time. Got eyes on a white pickup," Luis confirmed. "Light bar, sign says follow. You rolling close?" "Right behind your trailer, honey," she replied. "You move, I move." The pilot car's brake lights winked off. It began creeping forward. Luis released his brake and followed, keeping a careful distance. They entered the work zone. The cones guided the single open lane like a narrow, twisting path. On his right, the mountain dropped away into unseen depth. On the left, concrete barriers loomed, close enough that he double-checked his mirrors to make sure his trailer stayed true. The portable lights were placed in odd clusters, bright pools separated by pockets of shadow. In the lit patches, every detail was sharp: scuffed cones, faint chalk lines on the pavement, a forgotten shovel leaning against a barrier. In the dark pockets, the pilot car's taillights were the only reliable markers. Luis kept his focus locked on those lights. The pickup maintained a steady speed, not too slow, not rushed. The sign in its bed bounced gently. On the CB, chatter continued between him and the woman behind. Simple words, grounding words. "Cones real tight by your right side," she warned at one point. "You're clear by a foot." "Appreciate it," he said. They rounded another bend. The work lights behind them faded. New ones ahead bloomed into view. Something about the pattern made him uneasy. He tried to place it. Maybe it was the way the towers repeated at almost exact intervals. Each pool of light a match for the one before. Maybe it was the absence of any work equipment at all, no backhoe silhouettes, no piles of gravel, no stacks of new guardrail. The signs they passed were the same too. Road work ahead. Be prepared to stop. Rough surface. They appeared in the same order, with the same leaning angles, their reflective faces catching his beams in the same sharp flash. A déjà vu feeling crept in. Quiet but persiste. Ahead, the pilot car's blinker came on. It signaled right, though there was nowhere to turn, just the continuous narrow lane. Luis glanced at his dash. Turn signals all in working order. His own right blinker clicked in unison, though he hadn't touched the stalk. He frowned and checked the lever. It was in the neutral position. Yet on the panel, the arrow blinked, keeping pace with the pickups. "Hey, sunflower reefer behind me," he said into the CB, a lightness forced into his tone. "You see my blinker going?" "Affirmative," she replied. "Right side's flashing." "You thinking of a detour inside a detour?" Luis flipped the stalk deliberately to left, then back. His dash arrow kept blinking right, in time with the pilot car's rear lights. Then, as the pilot car straightened, its blinker snapped off. So did his. He tapped the brakes once. The pickup ahead didn't seem to notice, continuing its measured pace. The work lights hummed overhead. The cones went on. "How long you been through work like this?" the woman asked, perhaps sensing the tension. "Long time," he said absently. "Never with a pilot car that synced my blinkers before." She laughed softly. "Maybe you got one of those new fancy rigs that does tricks. Mine still needs me to tell it everything." He didn't answer. His eyes tracked a specific cone ahead with a faded diagonal scrape of black paint on it, half the reflective tape peeled away. He passed it. 5 minutes later, he passed the same cone again. The scrape's shape, the missing tape, the crack at its base that was no generic pattern. He knew it as well as he knew a face. His hand tightened on the wheel. "Sunflower," he said slowly. "You still seeing anything behind you? Any other trucks?" "Nope," she replied. "Just me, and your pretty taillights." "Why?" He watched another set of signs slide past. "Roadwork, ahead. Right lane closed. Be prepared to stop." The third one's corner was bent inward, a small tear at the mounting hole. He was sure he'd seen that tear before. "How long we been in this zone?" he asked quietly. There was a pause as she checked her clock. 20 minutes, give or take, she said. "Feels longer, though." Luis's own sense of time felt slippery. The monotony of the cones, the harsh lights, the soft sway of the truck made minutes blur. But 20 minutes in a one lane shouldn't feel like an hour. Ahead, the pilot car's brake lights glowed brighter. It slowed, almost to a crawl. The sign in its bed flickered, as if caught by some unseen gust. Then, abruptly, the right side brake light winked out, leaving only the left burning. Luis mumbled a quiet, automatic, "Great," and thumbed his mic. "Your lead's got a dead brake." "Heads up," he said. "Right side's out." "No, it's not," the woman said. "Both are fine for me. Nice and red. Maybe your angle's bad?" His chest gave a slow, uncomfortable squeeze. From his vantage point, the right lamp was dark, a hollow circle. Only the left glowed. But if she saw both, he leaned closer to the glass. The darkness in that right lens seemed deeper than shadow. The road narrowed further. The cone line pressed closer to the drop-off side. On his left, the concrete barrier brushed near enough he could have trailed his fingertips along it if he extended his arm through the window. No more forgotten tools. No stacks of materials. Just bare concrete and a hint of damp rock behind it. The mountain felt like it was closing in. He took a breath. Then, another. Veterans of the road learned to separate real danger from the tricks of fatigue. He knew that. He repeated it silently. Real danger. Bad pavement. Missing guardrail. Steep drop. Other vehicles. Tricks. Strange lights. Odd feelings. repetitive scenery. The problem was, sometimes the tricks came first. "Sunflower," he said. "I'm thinking we should have hit the far side of this zone by now." "Feels that way," she admitted. "You? Seeing anything weird up there?" He almost said no. He almost let the moment slide, chalking it up to nerves. But there was something about this night. The closed interstate, the forced detour, the bright two regular lights. "I've passed the same busted cone twice," he said. "Same torn sign. This pilot car. My blinkers were following his. And one of his brake lights doesn't match what you're seeing." Silence crackled. Then the woman spoke, voice quieter. "You want to know something?" she said. "About 10 minutes before you came on, I was stopped back there. Alone. No lead. No nothing. I was thinking about inching through anyway." "Why didn't you?" he asked. "I heard something on my radio," she said. "Low, like static talking. Couldn't make it out. Then these work lights blinked. All of them. Like someone flipped a switch off and on real fast." Louise swallowed. "We didn't see that. Maybe it happened before you rolled up," she said. "Maybe I imagined it. I was tired. Still am. But when that pilot car finally showed, I was more relieved than I should have been. I would have followed a shopping cart with a flashlight out of there." Ahead, the white pickup continued, unwavering. "Do me a favor," she added. "Humor a nervous stranger. Next time you see something you recognize the same sign, the same cone, count to 10. If you see it again, maybe we think about stopping." "Can't stop in the middle of a one lane," he said automatically. The training beat into him. "What if the one lane never ends?" she asked gently. The question hung in the lit air. They rounded another bend. The world momentarily shrank down to his beams and the pilot car's taillights. The mountain wall on the left was a blur of gray and shadow beyond the barrier. On the right, void. A new sign appeared up ahead, bright in his lights. "Rough surface, next 2 miles." Its bottom edge had been bent upward, a sharp little V, as if a tire had struck it and peeled it. Luis watched it pass. "1, he murmured under his breath. 2, 3. At 10, another sign came into view. "Rough surface, next 2 miles." Same bend, same little V. He clicked his mic, decision settling like a stone in his stomach. "I'm gonna slow," he said. "Real slow. You stick close. If that pilot wants us bad enough, he can come back." "Copy," she said. "If you're crazy, I'm crazy with you." He eased off the accelerator, feathered his brake. The rig responded with its familiar, heavy grace. The pilot car drew a bit farther ahead, then seemed to notice. Its brake light, the one he could see, flared. It slowed too. He slowed more. The pickup's orange light bar pulsed brighter, as if in agitation. The sign in its bed wobbled. Then, for the first time, its reverse lights flicked on. Just a flash. A hint. His skin cooled. It knew he was behind. It was paying attention. The CB hissed, then popped. A thin voice bled through no handle, no clear words, just a few disjointed syllables. "Keep up. Do not stop." Luis's hand tightened around the mic without pressing the button. The voice didn't sound like it was on channel 19. It sounded like it was coming from inside a tunnel, far away and yet right next to his ear. "Sunflower," he said quietly. "Did you just hear?" "Yeah," she said. "I heard it. I'm not touching my mic now." "You?" "No," he said. The work lights above them dimmed for a heartbeat, then brightened, as if the power feeding them had hiccuped. "Okay," he said, talking more to himself than to her. "Okay." He let the truck roll to a full stop. Air brakes sighed, loud in the tight space. Ahead, the pilot car's brake light glowed bright red. Its light bar spun faster, frenzied now. It didn't stop right away. It went a truck length forward, then another, as if on some pre-written script. Then it too halted. They faced each other down the narrow lane, the unmanned leader, and the loaded semi that had decided not to follow. In that moment, the valley felt impossibly deep around them. The world consisted of 2 vehicles, some plastic cones, and a thin strip of asphalt in the air. Luis's heartbeat thudded in his ears. "What now?" the woman whispered over the radio. The pilot car's taillight brightened again, then dimmed, then brightened. It was like it was breathing. The right brake light, the one Luis saw as dead, suddenly flared white, just for a second, like a flashbulb going off. It washed his cab in a brief, stark glare. In that white-on-black moment, he saw something strange. Beyond the pickup, past where the work lights ended, the road didn't curve and continue. It simply ended. The asphalt stopped at a jagged, broken edge. Beyond that, there was nothing but open space and darkness. No guardrail, no shoulder. Just a raw, torn line where earth had given way. The image vanished as quickly as it had come when the flare died, and the normal red resumed. But it was etched into his mind the cliff, the absence where the highway should have been. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice unsteady. "See what?" the woman said. "All I got is your trailer and a very annoyed-looking little truck up there. Open space, broken edge." He thought of the earlier closure on the interstate. "Major accident," the sign had said. The reroute might have been drawn hastily. Conditions out here could change fast. Landslides, washouts. What if the construction started because something had collapsed beyond this point? What if, in whatever time and place that pickup belonged to, the road had still been there? Solid. But now, the CB crackled hard, then cleared. "Do not stop," the thin voice said again, firmer now, like an echo from every safety lecture he'd sat through. "Follow pilot vehicle. Do not stop. Do not question." It sounded like a recording, a training video, a rule. Luis thought of all the times he'd followed such directions without much thought. Work zones were dangerous enough. When everyone did what they were supposed to, a rogue truck could ruin lives. But this time, his gut bone-deep, road-tested screamed at him that the real danger lay ahead, not behind. He set his jaw. "Negative," he said aloud, though he wasn't pressing the mic. Not this time. The pilot car's reverse lights flashed again, stronger. It inched backward toward him, as if trying to close the gap. The light bar spun so fast it became a continuous band of orange. Cones rattled in some faint wind he couldn't feel. "Luis?" the woman said. "You still there?" He realized he'd been holding his breath. "Yeah," he said. "Do me a favor. Ease back a few feet. Give me a little room." "I already did," she said. "When you stopped, I rolled back a hair. You got space if you need to back down." He glanced in his mirror. Her headlights had indeed fallen back, a respectful distance. She was giving him trust. Sight unseen. Ahead, the pilot car inched closer. The right brake light, the one he saw as dark a moment ago, winked on and off in a pattern. Short, short, long. Short, short, long. It took his brain a second to place it, like a code. He didn't want to know what it was saying. The gravelly voice from every work zone he'd ever been in seemed to speak in his memory. Never reverse in a one lane. Never compromise the flow. Always follow instructions. He put the Kenworth in reverse. The engine changed tone. The backup alarm began its slow, repetitive beep, 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 ridiculously small against the mountain and the hum of the work lights. He eased off the brake. The rig rolled backward, smooth and controlled. His eyes stayed on the mirrors, on the white glow of Sunflower's headlights edging further away. Cones passed beside him, their shadows sliding along the trailer. Ahead, the pilot car hesitated. Its reverse lights flickered, then went dark. For a split second, it seemed startled. Then its brake lights snapped off. The sign in its bed rattled. Without warning, it lurched forward. No slow acceleration, no careful pace. It shot ahead like a startled animal, orange light bar blazing. Luis saw the gap between its back bumper and the end of the illuminated zone in one harsh, frozen moment. The road surface just stopped. No barricade. No barrels. Just the raw cliff edge he'd glimpsed in that white flash. The pickup reached it and kept going. It didn't drop like a rock. It didn't explode. One instant it was there, light bar, a frantic halo, and the next it was gone, swallowed by darkness beyond the reach of the work lamps. The CB emitted a single piercing squeal, then cut out entirely for a heartbeat. In the stunned silence that followed, Only the backing alarm of Luis's own truck beeped steadily. "Luis," the woman said faintly. "What just happened? Your lead, it just—" She trailed off. Whatever her eyes were telling her didn't line up with what his had seen. "It's gone," he said hoarsely. "Road's gone too. There's nothing past those lights." He braked, bringing his backward crawl to a stop. The weight of the trailer settled behind him. For a few long seconds, neither spoke. Then, quietly, Sunflower said, "Then we don't go forward." He shook himself. "We don't go forward," he agreed. They inched their way out. Backing a loaded truck through a snaking lane of cones on a mountainside in the dead of night was the kind of thing every instructor would have called a last resort. Luis went slow. Painfully slow. He checked and rechecked his mirrors, straightened, adjusted. More than once he had to pull forward a foot or two to fix his line. Behind him, the woman offered calm, steady descriptions. "You're good on my side. Cone about a foot off your bumper. Keep it coming. Now cut a little left. Good. We're clear of that tower. Keep backing. Nice and easy." It felt like hours. It was probably 15 minutes. At last, the glow of the wider detour road appeared behind them. They broke free of the cone funnel and rolled back into the relative openness of the two-lane. Luis put the truck in neutral, set the brakes, and leaned his forehead briefly against the steering wheel. Down the hill, the work lights still blazed. The sign that read "Follow Pilot Car, Do Not Pass" stood exactly where he had first seen it. The empty lane beyond it curved out of sight, beckoning. His CB crackled as the other driver exhaled audibly. "Well," she said, voice a little shaky, "that's one for the grandkids." He laughed once, a dry sound. "You think they'd believe it?" "No," she said, "but I might tell it anyway." He glanced at his GPS. The device had lost its path inside the work zone. Now its rerouted lines suggested a small county road that swung wide around the mountain before rejoining a highway farther west. "I'm not going back up there," he said. "Me neither," she agreed. "What's your box saying?" He described the alternative. It was narrower, more rural, several extra miles. But it was there, and it went somewhere solid. "Ladies first," she said. "You roll, I'll follow. My luck tonight is officially outsourced to you." They turned off, leaving the unmoving work lights behind. The alternate road was no picnic. It twisted and dipped, shoulders thin, trees close. But it was real. Its bumps and patches and faint reflectors were imperfect in all the comforting ways real roads were. Half an hour later, they eased back onto a wider state highway. The pavement straightened. The mountain fell away behind them, disappearing into the rear view. Luis never saw the pilot car again. At the next all-night fuel stop, under the harsh white of another canopy, he heard pieces of the story from other drivers in bits and pieces. "Yeah, that work zone's been weird," one said. "Started after a rock slide took out a chunk of 9 last spring. Took a pilot and 2 pickups with it. Crew barely made it out." Another shook his head. "They say one of the pilot trucks went over trying to guide a tanker that wouldn't slow. Neither of them got found for 2 days. The driver used to say he could run that stretch with his eyes closed." He snorted without humor. Maybe that was the problem. A third driver mentioned something else. 2 weeks ago, a buddy of mine came through there in daylight. Said the one lane wasn't even set up yet. Just barricades at either end. Nobody allowed through. But that night, his GPS tried to send him right up to it. Kept saying, "Continue forward." Had to ignore the voice till it stopped. Luis kept his own account mostly to himself. He mentioned the closure, the detour, the hassle. He didn't talk about the brake lights that didn't match between eyes, or the way the road's edge had vanished under a pilot car that didn't seem to belong to any particular time. Still, the next time he was dispatched that way, months later, he checked the route carefully. The interstate had long since reopened. Repairs had been made, but County Highway 9 was still marked with a tiny orange exclamation point on his digital map. Possible delays, it read. He stayed on the interstate. On clear nights far from the mountains, when he passed smaller construction zones with their real, solid crews, men and women in bright vests, pickups labeled with contractor names, pilot cars with drivers he could see clearly through windows, he treated every one of them with a new, careful respect. He followed their signals when the path was clear, and when something in his gut twisted the wrong way, he remembered the harsh white glow, the broken edge of meaningless drop, and the way a single word no had felt like turning a wheel just in time. Some drivers still talked about odd experiences on that mountain detour. Work lights that blinked in unison with no wind to sway them. GPS reroutes lining them up in front of closed signs. A faint voice on the radio repeating guidance in tones too flat to be human. Most of them, by instinct or by accident, found another way around. A handful, now and then, mentioned seeing a white pickup in their mirrors in the depths of a bad storm, its orange light bar cutting through the snow, its sign wavering. Pilot car, follow me. Sometimes, following made sense. The road was real, the pavement solid. But sometimes, just sometimes, the right choice was to tap the brakes, check the map one more time, and remember that not every lead vehicle was guiding toward a destination that still existed. Story number 6. The desert at night had its own kind of silence. It wasn't empty, not really. There were insects humming somewhere out in the scrub, the distant bark of a dog near a ranch house, the low sigh of wind over sand. But compared to the noise of cities and truck stops, it felt like the world had turned its volume almost all the way down. Rosa liked that quiet. Her truck, a white Cascadia with her company's blue logo on the doors, rolled west along the interstate, under a sky full of stars. Out here, away from town lights, the sky didn't just sit overhead, it pressed in from every side, huge and black and glittering. Her clock read 12:07 a.m. The hum of the engine, the faint rattle in the passenger door she'd never quite tracked down, and the low murmur of late-night talk radio kept her company. She had a simple job tonight: bounce from a drop in Amarillo to a pickup at a cold storage warehouse outside a small city farther west, then park and sleep till morning. No mountains, no storms, just long, flat miles. The GPS on the dash showed her blue arrow gliding smoothly along the bright line of the interstate. In 3 hours, it promised, she'd be backing into a dock, paperwork in hand, thinking about coffee and a shower. Her phone buzzed in its cradle. Dispatch calling. Rosa sighed and hit the hands-free button. "Yeah, dispatch, you got Rosa." A man's voice came on the line, tinny through the cab speakers. "Hey, Rosa. Sorry to bug you this late. We've got a small change on that pickup." "Don't say cancellation," she said. "I'm already halfway there." "Not canceled," he said quickly. "Just relocated. Facility had a refrigeration issue, so they're shifting your load to another site. Still in the same general area. You'll be going to Hollister Ridge Industrial instead of West Point Cold." "Hollister Ridge," she repeated, frowning slightly. "That off the bypass?" "Yeah, looks like it," he said. She heard keys clicking in the background. "I'm sending you updated instructions now. Same freight, same delivery window. You're just hooking there instead." Her GPS chirped as new directions appeared. "Got it," she said. "Everything else good?" "All good," he confirmed. "You're tracking ahead of schedule. Call if you have any trouble." The line clicked off. Her map adjusted, the smooth, bright line shifting south at a point ahead. Hollister Ridge. The name tickled something at the back of her mind. She'd seen it on old signs before, she was sure. A town the main interstate now curved around, bypassed by progress and bigger roads. She couldn't remember ever taking that exit. The radio drifted to static as she drove deeper into the low hills. She clicked it off and let the quiet stretch. 20 miles later, a green sign appeared on the right. Exit 214, Hollister Ridge, 1 mile. The reflective letters glowed briefly, then were gone. Rosa glanced at the GPS. The arrow agreed. "Exit 214, the calm voice said. "Take the right ramp. Then continue on State Route 37. The ramp came and went in a dark swoop. She guided the rig down, the wide interstate lights falling away behind her. The new road narrowed to 2 lanes, its surface a little more worn, its markings less bright. Tall, thin pines and low scrub lined the shoulders. A faded billboard loomed on the right, its paint sunburned almost white. As her headlights swept it, she caught a glimpse of a smiling family, ice cream cones raised, and text that read, "Come see us at Hollister Ridge Fair. July 1999. She blinked and kept driving. The road dipped and curved. Half a mile ahead, An orange glow seeped up from behind a low rise, like the light of a town too small to throw its shine far. GPS signal weak, her device chirped quietly. Continue on current road. She rolled her shoulders, easing a kink out of her neck. The emptiness of the interstate had given way to something closer, denser. The trees leaned in. The night felt thicker. Another sign appeared. Welcome to Hollister Ridge. Elevation 3,842. Founded 1,901. Below that, someone had hung a banner on frayed rope. The letters were faded, but still legible. Harvest Festival. Oct 2003. The date sent a small, inexplicable chill through her. 20 years ago. The first buildings of the town rose up out of the dark, small houses with deep porches, a couple of narrow storefronts with angled awnings, a gas station with a sloping canopy and a tall sign. She passed the sign slowly, eyes flicking to the numbers. Unleaded, 1.29. Diesel, 1.09. The prices sat on old sliding panels, a few digits crooked. The logo at the top was for a fuel brand she hadn't seen in use in years. The station itself was lit though. Yellow light spilled from its windows. A lone figure in a jacket leaned on the counter inside, talking to someone unseen. A soda machine hummed near the door. Her GPS cleared its throat again. In 1 mile, turn left onto Industrial Way, it said, voice thinner than usual. She drove on. Main Street, or what passed for it, unfolded in a short stretch of shops. A diner with a neon sign that buzzed softly. Ridge Diner. Open 24, HRS. Next to it, a hair salon with posters of hairstyles long out of fashion. A small hardware store with rows of rakes and shovels displayed in the window. On the sidewalk, a man in a brimmed hat swept dust from his doorway. A dog padded along the curb, tail wagging lazily. A woman in a long coat closed up a floral shop, turning off lights one by one. It could have been any small town on any back road, except for the feeling that everything was a step out of time. Rosa checked the digital clock on her dash. 12:43 a.m. The town was lively for that hour, but she knew some places clung hard to late nights. She watched for her turn. A small blue sign appeared. Industrial Way. 500 feet. Truck route. An arrow pointed left. She flipped her blinker, slowed, and eased the big rig through a wide, gentle turn onto a darker stretch of road. The houses thinned. Low chain-link fences replaced picket ones. The glow of sodium lamps marked larger lots, big metal-sided buildings, parked trailers. An industrial park, old but functional, lay ahead. At the entrance, a sign on a stone base read, Hollister Ridge, Industrial Complex, Warehouse, Distribution, Cold Storage. Several company names were listed beneath, including one she recognized, West Point Cold Storage, Unit B. There you are, she murmured. She turned in through the open gate. No guard shack, no badge scanner. Just a wide asphalt lot with white lines marking trailer bays and a row of docks along the long, low building. Truck docks 1 through 12 were stenciled above roll-up doors. Most were closed. At dock 7, a green light glowed above the door, and an older white trailer sat snug against the rubber bumpers. Rosa saw no other movement. No forklifts, no workers. She rolled to a stop beside the small office door, air brakes hissing. The building's windows glowed softly from inside. A radio played faint country music near the front. She grabbed her paperwork and climbed down, the crunch of her boots loud in the stillness. The night air smelled like cold concrete, faint diesel, and the metallic tang of refrigeration units humming somewhere behind the walls. When she opened the office door, a bell chimed. The interior felt like stepping back a decade or two. A corkboard with curled yellowed memos. A calendar on the wall featuring a tractor that had been new 15 or 20 years earlier. A metal desk with grooves worn by countless elbows. Behind the counter, a man in a gray work shirt looked up. He was in his 50s maybe, with a weathered face and a pencil tucked behind one ear. A hand-lettered name patch on his chest read, "Frank, can I help you?" he asked, his voice scratchy from too many overnight shifts and too much cheap coffee. "Here for a pickup," Rosa said, holding up her folder. "West Point Cold, load U79. Dispatch said you shifted here due to a cooler issue. Armo. Frank's brow furrowed slightly, then smoothed. West Point. Yeah, he said slowly. They're down on the south end. You're a little early for U-79. He took her paperwork, flipped through it, then reached under the counter for a worn logbook. Rosa, right? He asked, reading off the page. She nodded. He checked a clock on the wall behind him. The hands pointed to 11:10. Her own watch said 12:49. Been making good time, he remarked, scribbling something. You'll be at door 9. Back in, set brake, and wait for a green light. We'll get you loaded. He handed her a laminated badge on a clip. Wear this if you step out. She clipped it to her shirt. You folks do a lot of night freight? She asked casually. Frank gave a small, tired smile. The road doesn't sleep, he said. We stay busy enough. As she turned to go, the radio behind the counter crackled. A man's voice came through, oddly flat. Dock 9's clear, it said. Send her on back. Frank reached for the mic. Copy that, he replied. Driver's on her way. Rosa paused. The voice on the radio had no background sound. No clank of pallets. No whir of forklifts. Just strained words floating in a still space. She let it go and headed back to her truck. Backing into Dock 9 took only a minute. She set the brake, chocked the wheels as instructed, and felt the small, familiar bump as the trailer settled against the bumpers. Above the dock, the outside light flicked from red to amber, then to solid green. Somewhere deep in the building, machinery hummed. She waited. Usually, when she sat in a dock at night, she could feel the shudder of forklifts moving in the trailer, hear the muffled thuds of pallets shifting. Here, there was none of that. The trailer stayed unnervingly still. She peered into her side mirror, toward the warehouse's rear wall. The only motion she saw was a faint ripple of shadow behind small, high windows. On the dash, her clock still read 12:52. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The green light above the dock remained steady. Finally, curiosity outweighed patience. She set the truck's interior door lock, pocketed her keys, and climbed down. In the narrow alley between trailers and building, the air was cold and very still. Her footsteps tapped softly on the concrete. The personnel door near Dock 9 was slightly ajar. Light seeped out in a narrow stripe. Rosa pushed it open. Inside, the warehouse stretched in long, fluorescent-lit aisles. Tall racks, mostly empty, lined the space. A few pallets sat here and there, wrapped in cloudy plastic. The air smelled faintly of coolant and cardboard. At the far end, near a loading bay, she saw movement of forklift drifting across an aisle, its beeping muted. She headed that way, badge catching the light. As she walked, something tickled at the edge of her perception. A delay. Almost. Between the motion her eyes registered and the sound that followed. The distant beeping of the forklift seemed to come a half-second too late. She reached the bay. The forklift's forks were raised, pallet balanced. The driver, young, hair under a cap, safety vest over sweatshirt, looked up as she approached, then did a double take. You're early, he said. So I've been told, she replied. Good, he said. We can use the time. He rolled past her, heading toward her dock. His machine's tires left no tracks in the fine dust on the concrete. Rosa glanced toward the open interior of her trailer. Empty. No pallets. No driver. No noise. Yet, as she listened, she heard the clunk of a pallet being set down, somewhere very nearby. The sound came from the direction of her trailer, just as it should. But when she looked, nothing had changed. A sensation like standing half in one dream and half in another slipped over her. She backed away, out the door, and returned to her cab. Her watch, 1:03 a.m. Dash clock, 12:52. The green light above the dock flicked once, then again, as if caught in a brief pulse, before settling. A soft thud vibrated through the frame. The kind she knew well. Weight going on. Another. And another. After 15 minutes of this invisible loading, the dock light turned red. A buzzer sounded briefly, then fell silent. Rosa climbed down, pulled the chocks, and eased the truck a few feet forward, breaking the seal between trailer and building. The trailer felt heavier, not disturbingly so, just as if a normal palletized load had been put on. She checked the locks, shrugged off her unease, and went to get her paperwork signed. Back in the office, Frank had a stack of forms ready. He slid them across the counter. She signed, noting the date at the top. Oct 12, 2003. Her stomach dipped. Your date's off, she said lightly, tapping the field. We're a little past 2003. Frank glanced down, then back up at her, something tight flashing across his features. Printer's been stuck, he said quickly. Old templates. We don't waste paper for a number. She looked at the ink. It wasn't printer ink. It was the faint, almost stamped look of an older dot matrix, or even a typewriter. A datum that should have been forgettable, but wasn't. She left with the paperwork anyway. Outside, the town waited. Her GPS chirped back to life as soon as she passed through the industrial gate. Turn right, it said, then continue 1 mile to State Route 37. The road back through the industrial park looked the same. Security lights, a lone soda can rolling in a gutter. The sound of a distant compressor ticking. She reached the intersection with the main road, turned right, and headed for the center of town. The diner's neon sign buzzed. The same man swept the same patch of sidewalk, his broom scratching in the same rhythm. The same dog trotted at the same pace, pausing to sniff the same lamppost. The gas station price sign still read 1.29 and 1.09. Rosa's fingers tightened on the wheel. Hair dash clock, 12:52. Her watch, 1:19. GPS signal lost, the device announced. Ahead, the green sign that had welcomed her in loomed. Welcome to Hollister Ridge. She checked her mirrors. Her trailer rolled steady behind. No vehicles in sight either way. Did I... She spoke to the empty cab. Did I loop? She hadn't turned. She'd driven straight. And yet, the arrangement of buildings, the small park with its statue, the row of angle-parked cars, everything aligned exactly as it had an hour ago. This time, she watched more closely. The man sweeping looked up, glanced at her truck, then returned to his work. The woman locking the floral shop door paused, key in hand, then finished the turn, just as before. The dog lifted one paw, scratched its ear, then ambled on. Their movements were identical down to the gesture. She drove on. Once again, the road dipped, the orange town glow fell behind, and the industrial park sign loomed. Hollister Ridge Industrial Complex. She had made a circle. A slow, cold awareness crept up her spine. Dispatch, she said, flicking her phone free and hitting the call button. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, then clicked into silence. No greeting, no voicemail, nothing. No bars showed on the tiny signal icon. She tried the CB. Breaker 1 to 9, she said, voice steady. Anyone copy west of Hollister Ridge, State 37? This is Rosa. I'm having a little fun with my directions. Static answered. No voices. Not even the hiss of distant chatter. She drove the loop twice more. Each time, the details repeated precisely. Same blinking pattern on the motel's half-lit sign. Same flicker of a TV behind a second-story window. Same little burst of music from the diner when someone opened the door. Her truck's physical movement felt real. The G-forces in the curves, the low pull of the loaded trailer as she climbed a shallow grade. But the town's face didn't change. On the third pass, as she rolled past the gas station, she saw something different. At the far pump, a dark shape stood, a semi, older, with a rounded cab and a faded logo for a carrier she knew had gone under years ago. Its lights were off, no driver visible, yet its presence there, when it hadn't been before, snagged her attention. The station's overhead speaker crackled. A voice drifted across the lot, thin and far away. Pump 3's ready, Earl, it said. Don't forget your receipt this time. No one moved. As she rolled by, she caught a glimpse of the fuel price sign again. Unleaded 1.29. Diesel 1.09. The numbers seemed to shimmer, as if not quite anchored to the plastic slats. Rosa's heart ticked faster. On her 4th pass through Main Street, as she stared at the same woman closing the same floral shop door, the CB crackled. Driver, a voice said, low and a little distorted. You're still there. Rosa's hand shot out, snatching the mic. Who's this? She asked. You got Rosa in Hollister Ridge. I could use a friendly voice. Static swelled, then thinned. The voice came through again. "Don't follow the loop," it said. "You'll ride it till you're as thin as a ghost." "You listening?" She swallowed. "I'm listening." "You got your GPS on?" the voice asked. "Yes," she said. "It's not much help." "Turn it off," the voice said. "Turn it off and look up." They built new roads over old ones. "You're on what's left of both." Her thumb shook a little as she pressed the power button on the GPS. The bright blue arrow winked out, leaving only the empty bracket of the mount. Outside the windshield, the town flowed by again. The diner, the gas station, the hardware store, all lit with the same soft, tired glow. "How do I get out?" she asked. The voice paused. When it spoke again, it sounded older. Tired. "First time they sent me through there," it said. Hollister Ridge was alive, real. Second time it was something else. "You can follow the big signs round and round forever if you let them. Or you can look for the ones they almost forgot." "What signs?" she asked. "Truck route arrows," the voice said. "They point the circle. See one, go the other way. You get one shot, maybe two, before the road forgets you." The CB hissed loud, then cut to a whisper. "Can't talk long. Just remember. Wrong way, right time." The line went dead. Rosa drove in silence for a long moment, the wheel solid under her hands, the familiar vibration of her truck grounding her. Then she started looking. The truck route arrows weren't obvious. Faded paint on asphalt. Small blue and white placards half hidden behind tree branches. Metal signs bolted to posts, edges rusted, arrows pointing confidently in the direction she had been going all along. Truck route. One read at a T intersection where she always turned right back toward Main Street. This time she didn't. She turned left. The road narrowed quickly. No center line. The town lights thinned, then fell behind. A stand of trees closed in, branches reaching overhead in a knot of shadows. Her headlights showed a sign ahead, small and crooked. "Service road. Use at own risk." The letters were chipped, part of the metal sagging, graffiti scrawled faintly across the bottom. An old arrow pointed up a short, steep incline. This was not on her GPS route. It was not on any printable map she'd seen. It looked like something meant for maintenance crews and locals. "Wrong way, right time," she murmured. She put on her blinker out of sheer habit, though no one was there to see it, and turned onto the service road. The pavement was rough, cracked in a spider web of lines, patched haphazardly. Grass grew in some of the breaks. Her trailer creaked as it followed, suspension working harder than before. Behind her, Hollister Ridge's glow flickered between trees, then vanished as she crested a small rise. Ahead, the service road curved along the side of a low hill. To her right, the land fell away into darkness. To her left, the slope rose, dotted with scrub. Halfway along, she caught a glimpse of something below. An empty valley, a wide, flat scar, where a road once ran. Concrete pillars ending in nothing. A broken bridge hanging in midair over dry rock, its far side fallen away. For a moment, in the sweep of her lights, she saw the shape of an old highway, half collapsed, the remains of road signs twisted at strange angles. Among them, a green panel caught her beam, letters just visible. "Lista Rich, Tommy." She shivered. The service road wound on, clinging to the hillside. It merged at last, with a more modern stretch of pavement, smooth and freshly painted. A new overpass arched up and over the scarred valley, concrete bright under her headlights. As she joined it, her phone buzzed back to life. Service bars blinked into existence. Notifications flooded in missed calls. Delayed emails, the usual small electronic noise of being part of the connected world. The dash clock flicked. 3:04 a.m. Her watch, which had been creeping along painfully, now matched it exactly. In her mirror, the dark lump of the hill she had skirted shrank. No sign of town lights, no glimmer of neon. Just the blank, star-dotted sky above an empty stretch of land. The CB, silent since the last words of the unknown voice, crackled once. "Still with us?" A new voice asked her dispatcher, lively and unaware. "Looks like you popped off the grid for a bit. Everything okay?" "You're showing back en route now." Rosa pressed the talk button slowly. "Yeah," she said. "Minor detour. Had to take the scenic way." "You're good on time," he said. Warehouse report says you're loaded and rolling. Just bring it in safe. She almost asked him what date their system showed on her paperwork. Almost asked if the Hollister Ridge facility was new or old, or if anyone in the office had actually been there. Instead, she said, "Copy that," and hung the mic back up. At a truck stop on the far side of the state line, just as a pale gray seeped into the eastern sky, she sat at a counter with a mug of coffee and asked the woman pouring it a question. "You ever hear of a place called Hollister Ridge?" she said. "Industrial park out that way?" The woman, whose badge read Mary in faded letters, pursed her lips. "Hollister Ridge?" she echoed. "Haven't heard that name in a long time." An older driver, 2 stools down, looked over. "Hollister used to be the main stop along the old 37, he said. "Town took a hit when they built the bypass. Then there was that freight train derailment about 20 years back. Hazmat spill. They evacuated the whole place. Never really reopened, far as I know." Mary nodded. "They say some warehouses kept paperwork going for a bit after," she added. "On paper, lots of things stay open long after they're empty." The older driver took a sip of his coffee. "Every now and then," he said, "I hear some young buck talk about following his GPS down an exit that shouldn't be there. Says he ended up in a town that doesn't match any map he can find. Always late at night. Always on a tight schedule." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My advice? You see a sign for Hollister Ridge. You keep rolling." Rosa thought of the gas station with its ancient prices, the diner with its buzzing neon, the handwritten date on her bills. When she checked those bills later in the daylight, they looked perfectly normal. Current date, correct year. The same signatures she'd seen in the small office, though the ink looked fresher now. The load rode heavy but uneventful. The receiver signed without comment. Nobody questioned where, exactly, she had picked it up. In the months that followed, when her routes took her anywhere near that stretch of highway, she watched the exit numbers carefully. Between 212 and 216, there was no 214, just a long, smooth run of guardrail and scrub, the new overpass arching over a valley scar. No green sign for Hollister Ridge marked the way. On clear nights, under a sky full of stars, other drivers sometimes reported odd things on that part of the interstate. A faint glow off to the south where no town should be. A radio station playing old ads for a harvest festival that passed decades ago. A GPS that insisted, briefly, on a turn that no longer existed. Most ignored it. Some didn't. If a driver followed a certain narrow road down into that hollow where the old highway had once run, maybe they'd find nothing but dirt and cracked concrete. Or maybe, on the right night, at the right hour, they'd find themselves rolling past a gas station with prices too low to be real, a diner's neon casting a pink reflection on chrome, and an industrial park whose clocks never quite caught up with the world outside. And if, in that quiet, looping town, a voice came over the CB, low and insistent, telling them to look for the wrong way out, it might be worth listening. Sometimes, the scariest thing on the road wasn't something trying to hurt anyone. It was a place, or a pattern, that wanted to keep them driving the same streets forever, until the rest of the world had moved on without them. Rosa kept her GPS updated, her logs clean, and her eyes just a little sharper on unplanned detours. Out on the interstate, where the lanes were wide and the signs were bright and current, it was easy to forget the smaller roads that ran alongside time itself. But she knew now that, somewhere beyond the guardrail, there were towns and warehouses and work still going on, in ways that didn't show up on any schedule. And she knew, if she ever heard that low voice again, she'd remember. Not every route the system offered was meant for the living to take.